ほら、ルフィ、今一緒に海賊になる仲間を探してるんだ。
Hello guys, welcome to my channel The Wandering Zoro, your go-to destination for anime-related content. And if you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out on our latest videos. In today's video, we're going to be diving into part 2 of the series. So be sure to stick around until the end, and let's get started. Tokyo Metropolitan Curse Technical School. Morning. The warm rays of the morning sun bathed the courtyard of Tokyo Metropolitan Curse Technical School in a golden glow. Three distinctive figures stood out against the backdrop of the pristine campus. Two students in crisp, dark uniforms, and, oddly enough, a living, breathing panda. The sight was so surreal that it almost seemed like a fever dream. The panda, his black and white fur glistening in the sunlight, turned to his human companions with an excited glint in his round eyes. "Did you hear about the transfer student starting today?" he asked, his voice surprisingly articulate for a bear. He unknowingly helped All Might stop that sludge villain. The male student, a tall boy with messy hair and a perpetually bored expression, merely shrugged. "Tuna mayo," he muttered, his mind more focused on his favorite sandwich than the topic at hand. The female student, a bespectacled fiery tomboy with sharp eyes and an intimidating aura, scoffed at the panda's words. She cracked her knuckles, a mischievous smirk playing on her lips. "So if the kid thinks he's a hot shot, I'll rough him up a bit," she declared, her tone a mix of excitement and challenge. "Fish flakes," the second male added as an afterthought, playing along with her male companion's food-themed responses. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation as they waited for the new student to arrive. Flashback. Meanwhile, with Gojo. In a dimly lit room, Gojo held up a knife, its blade noticeably dented from repeated use. He tilted his head, his bandaged eyes somehow still conveying curiosity. "That was a knife. Izukayagi?" he said, his voice a mix of amusement and intrigue. Izuku's eyes flashed angrily, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. The air around him seemed to crackle with tension. "First of all, don't call me Yagi," he growled, his voice low and filled with a pain that seemed to go far beyond his years. He looked up at the bandage-eyed man, his gaze sharp enough to cut. "Besides," Izuku continued, his voice growing bitter, "I know you have files on me. And you know about my failed suicide attempt." The words hung heavy in the air, a stark reminder of the darkness that had consumed him. Gojo's demeanor shifted slightly, a hint of concern seeping through his carefree facade. He let the knife drop to the floor with a clatter. "Yikes, that's one way to do an introduction," he said, his tone softer than before. "And on your first day at your new school, no less." Izuku's hair fell forward, shadowing his eyes. His shoulders slumped, the weight of his past bearing down on him. "I'm not going," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. Gojo paused, studying the boy before him. He could sense the turmoil roiling beneath Izuku's surface, the pain and loneliness that threatened to consume him. "But you'll be lonely," Gojo said gently, his words more of an observation than a question. Izuku's head snapped up, his eyes blazing with defiance and despair. "Lonely?" he scoffed, his voice cracking slightly. "I've been lonely my entire life. What's one more day? There's only one person. No, one family that I care about," Izuku thought, his mind drifting to Itsuka and the Kendo family. Their warm smiles and kind gestures flashed through his memory, a stark contrast to the cold emptiness he felt now. He could almost feel the ghost of Itsuka's kiss on his cheek, a bittersweet reminder of what he had left behind. Gojo observed the subtle shift in Izuku's expression, sensing the conflict within him. He leaned forward, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "Listen, Izuku," he said, emphasizing the boy's first name. "The curse attached to you. It's not just a burden. Depending on how it's used, it can be a tool, a way to help people." Izuku's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of interest breaking through his despondent facade. Gojo continued, his words measured and deliberate. "Learn to control its power. Master it. It won't be easy, but nothing worth doing ever is. The white-haired man paused, letting his words sink in. Then, with a gentleness that belied his eccentric appearance, he added, "Once you've done that, then you can decide whether throwing it all away is worth it. But give yourself a chance first. You might be surprised at what you're capable of." Izuku's fists unclenched slightly, his shoulders relaxing just a fraction. For the first time since he'd arrived, a tiny spark of hope flickered in his eyes. He looked at Gojo, really looked at him, and saw not just a strange man with bandaged eyes, but someone who might understand, who might be able to help. "Find out I'll go," Izuku said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. Time skip. Present time. Morning. Izuku woke up in one of the dorms that Gojo had assigned to him, his eyes slowly adjusting to the dim morning light filtering through the curtains. He sat up, his muscles still aching from yesterday's training, and ran a hand through his messy black hair. With a sigh, he dragged himself out of bed and shuffled to the bathroom. As he brushed his teeth, Izuku stared at his reflection in the mirror. Dark circles under his eyes betrayed his restless night, filled with memories of his past and uncertainties about his future. He splashed some cold water on his face, trying to shake off the lingering exhaustion. Returning to his room, Izuku noticed a neatly folded uniform hanging on the closet door. He picked up the clothes, running his fingers over the fabric. It felt strange, almost surreal, to be putting on a school uniform again after everything he'd been through. Izuku slipped on the loose, white uniform jacket, rolling up the sleeves to his forearms. The slender black pants and white sneakers completed the ensemble. He stood in front of the full-length mirror, taking in his appearance. The uniform fit well, but Izuku hardly recognized the person staring back at him. "All right, let's get this over with," Izuku muttered, his voice a mixture of resignation and determination. He grabbed his bag and headed out, stepping into the warm sunlight that bathed the campus. As Izuku walked towards the main building, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of anxiety. This was supposed to be a fresh start, but the weight of his past still clung to him like a shadow. He took a deep breath, reminding himself of Gojo's words about mastering his curse and giving himself a chance. Meanwhile, Gojo had already slid into the classroom with his usual flair, facing the 3 students who were present and sitting on desks. His bandaged eyes seemed to sparkle with excitement as he announced, Student, give him a hand." The panda looked up mildly interested. The tall boy barely stirred, his eyes half closed as if he was still half asleep. The bespectacled fiery tomboy merely raised an eyebrow, her expression a mix of skepticism and curiosity. "Really? Not one hand?" Gojo asked, his tone playfully disappointed. The bespectacled fiery tomboy, sitting sideways in her chair with her hand on her head and legs crossed, smirked. "I hear the guy's a wannabe badass. Delinquent? Doubt it. Hell, I bet he's afraid," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Salmon," the boy to her right muttered, his contribution to the conversation as cryptic as ever. The panda remained silent, watching the scene unfold with curious eyes. Gojo sighed, his shoulders slumping in exaggerated defeat. "Whatever. Come in," he called out, his voice carrying through the classroom and into the hallway beyond. The halls of Jujutsu High were quiet as Izuku stood outside his assigned classroom. He paused, his hand hovering over the shoji's handle. "The atmosphere feels chilly," he thought, a shiver running down his spine despite the warmth of the day. Inside the classroom, the bespectacled fiery tomboy mused, "Gonna give him the signing treatment." Her eyes glinted with mischief as she prepared for the new student's arrival. As Izuku slid open the smooth wooden shoji door, he felt a sudden rush of energy wash over him. The moment he stepped into the classroom, a deep crimson-red aura erupted around him, casting an eerie glow that seemed to pulse with an unsettling intensity. The atmosphere shifted dramatically, and the 3 students seated at their desks instinctively tensed, their eyes wide with apprehension. Rika's figure emerged from the shadows behind him, her presence adding to the tension in the air. She moved with an air of malevolence, her expression unreadable as she followed him into the room. Izuku made his way to the center, the floorboards creaking slightly beneath his feet, and he could feel their hostile and alert gazes lingering on him, as if they were trying to decipher the sudden change that had overtaken the once familiar space. "The name's Izuku. It's nice to," he began, his voice steady despite the tension in the room. However, before he could finish his sentence, a sharp sound echoed through the room. An ominous whoosh followed by a metallic clang as a naginata embedded itself into the chalkboard behind him, sending chalk dust spiraling into the air. The bladed staff was dangerously close to hitting his head on the left side. The abrupt interruption caught everyone's attention, and the atmosphere shifted instantly from casual to tense. With a steadying breath and an unwavering tone, Izuku calmly resumed, "Mikyu." His demeanor remained composed, showing that the sudden disruption didn't easily shake him. "Hey, you," the tomboy called out to Izuku, her voice cutting through the tense atmosphere. Her golden eyes narrowed behind her glasses as she studied him. "Don't you know you're cursed? This is a place to learn about curses, not for cursed people." Izuku felt a familiar anger bubbling up inside him. His fists clenched at his sides, and he had to take a deep breath to keep his composure. "Great," he thought bitterly, "just what I needed. Another elitist school that discriminates against people who are different." Gojo, sensing the rising tension, stepped forward. His bandaged face turned towards the students, his voice taking on a more serious tone. Now, he said, "let's not jump to conclusions. Izuku's presence here is no accident." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "You see, in our world, the average number of unexplained deaths and missing person cases far exceeds what you might expect. And let's not forget about the disproportionately high suicide rates among the quirkless population." The students' expressions shifted from hostility to curiosity as Gojo spoke. Even Izuku found himself listening intently, despite his lingering anger. "The majority of these cases," Gojo explained, his voice taking on a lecturer's cadence, "are the result of negative energy that flows out of people. This energy manifests as curses, and in some cases, these curses are wielded by evil curse users. You'll have to fight curses with curses. Here we'll learn about curses in order. This is Tokyo Prefectural Jujitsu High School," Gojo said, his voice full of excitement and seriousness. Izuku's eyes widened, his mouth falling open slightly. He turned to look at Gojo, his expression a mixture of disbelief and exasperation. "You're telling me this now?" he thought, his inner voice practically screaming in frustration. He couldn't believe that such crucial information had been withheld from him until this moment. The other 3 students in the room seemed equally taken aback. They exchanged glances, their faces a comical display of surprise and confusion. Almost in unison, they all turned to stare at Gojo, their thoughts practically visible above their heads. "You didn't tell him?" Gojo, seemingly oblivious to the bewildered atmosphere he had created, simply shrugged. "My bad," he said, his tone nonchalant as if he had merely forgotten to mention the weather forecast. Then his demeanor suddenly shifted, a hint of urgency creeping into his voice. "Also, I'd step back if I were you guys." The 3 students looked at each other, confusion etched on their faces. Before they could react or question Gojo's cryptic warning, the atmosphere in the room changed dramatically. 2 pale, slender hands suddenly emerged from the chalkboard behind Izuku, their appearance as unexpected as it was unsettling. The hands seemed to materialize out of thin air, ghostly and translucent, yet undeniably present. One of the hands reached out, its fingers elongating unnaturally as they wrapped around the blade end of the naginata that had been thrown earlier. The weapon, which had been lying forgotten on the floor, now seemed to vibrate with an otherworldly energy. The air in the room grew noticeably colder, a chill seeping into the bones of everyone present. A distorted voice echoed through the classroom, filled with a protective fury that sent shivers down the spines of all who heard it. "Do not bully." The voice was unmistakably Rika's, but it was twisted and warped, barely recognizable as human. It carried with it an undercurrent of rage and pain that seemed to reverberate through the very walls of the classroom. Izuku's eyes widened in alarm, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. He spun around, his movements jerky with panic. "Rika!" Cracking with desperation. He raised his hands in a placating gesture, fingers splayed wide as if he could physically hold back the impending chaos. The other students stood frozen in stunned silence, their earlier animosities and jabs evaporating like morning fog under the harsh glare of this unexpected and terrifying development. Eyes that had once been filled with derision were now wide with a mix of fear and reluctant intrigue. Mouths that had been curved in sneers now hung open in shock. Among them, the bespectacled fiery tom girl, who had mocked and belittled only moments ago, now watched with a palpable tension etched across her features. Her golden eyes, previously narrowed in disdain, were now wide open, a strange blend of shock and fascination mingling in her expression. Her hands, which had been so confidently wielding her naginata, now trembled slightly at her sides. As the atmosphere thickened, hanging heavy with electric anticipation, Rika's distorted voice cut through the tension again. This time, it was laced with an edge of desperation that was almost unrecognizable beneath her simmering anger. Izuka? Her desperate scream pierced the air like a siren, reverberating around the now hushed room. Each syllable seemed to draw the attention of the three students as her ghostly, distorted pale, right hand inched closer. The fingers of Rika's spectral hand elongated further, twitching and curling as if they had a mind of their own. They reached out to the students, particularly to the tom girl who had been taunting Izuku. The sight sent shivers down their spines, the chilling realization sinking in that they were witnesses to something otherworldly and profoundly unsettling. The classroom, which had been a battlefield of teenage rivalry and cruel jabs just moments ago, now felt like a different world entirely. The fluorescent lights flickered ominously, casting eerie shadows that seemed to dance in sync with Rika's ghostly movements. The air grew thick with tension, making it hard to breathe, as if the very atmosphere was waiting with bated breath to see what would happen next. Scene change. This is Izuku. Everyone get along okay? Gojo announced with his usual enthusiasm, his voice filling the tense classroom. He gestured towards Izuku, who stood awkwardly at the front, his teal eyes darting nervously around the room. The young man's messy back hair seemed to reflect his inner turmoil as he tried to process everything that had just happened. Gojo's tone became slightly more serious as he continued, his hidden eyes seeming to scan the room behind his blindfold. So that's all it is. He's cursed by Rika, a girl who adores him. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the class. Attacking Izuku may or may not activate Rika's curse. Anyway, just be careful. His voice took on a hint of amusement as he added, we don't want any more incidents. Izuku couldn't help but sweat drop at the scene before him, his gaze traveling over his new classmates. The fiery tom girl, who had been so quick to judge him earlier, now sported white bandages on her face, stark against her flushed skin. She sat with her arms crossed tightly over her chest, a deep frown etched on her features. Her golden eyes, still visible behind her glasses, seemed to burn with a mix of anger and embarrassment. To her right, the tall boy who had barely stirred earlier now had a comically large knot on the top of his head, with wisps of steam visibly rising from it. His eyes were slightly unfocused, and he swayed gently in his seat, as if still trying to process what had just happened. His long, lanky frame seemed even more awkward as he attempted to maintain his balance. Even the panda, which Izuku was still trying to wrap his head around, a talking panda, in a school uniform, hadn't escaped unscathed. White bandages were wrapped around the top of its head, creating a stark contrast against its black and white fur. Steam rose from beneath the bandages, giving the surreal impression of a sentient stuffed animal that had somehow been injured. They're going through a rebellious phase, so I'll just make some quick introductions, Gojo said, his voice carrying a mix of amusement and exasperation. He gestured towards the fiery tom girl with the glasses, who was still clutching the naginata. This is Maki Zenin, a cursed tool user. Izuku's eyes widened as he took in Maki's appearance. She stood with a confident posture, her athletic build evident even under her school uniform. Her small golden eyes seemed to flash with intelligence and a hint of defiance as they met Izuku's gaze. Long dark green hair was tied into a short ponytail that swayed slightly with each movement, while fringes fell over her forehead and smaller strands framed her face. The glasses perched on her nose caught the light, and Izuku wondered if they were the special kind he'd heard about, the ones that allowed the wearer to see curses. She utilizes special tools to exorcise curses. Gojo continued, a hint of pride in his voice. Don't let her appearance fool you. She's quite skilled. Maki scoffed at the introduction, rolling her eyes, but Izuku noticed a slight upturn at the corner of her mouth. She eyed him with a mixture of curiosity and wariness, as if reassessing her earlier judgment. Gojo then turned to the tall boy with the spiky platinum blonde hair. This is Toge Inumaki, our cursed speech user. Izuku couldn't help but stare at Inumaki's unique features. His purple-colored eyes were striking against his pale skin, and his uniform, tinted a deep royal blue, set him apart from the others. What caught Izuku's attention the most, however, was the high collar with a zipper that covered Inumaki's mouth. Strange, intricate markings peeked out from beneath the collar, visible on his cheeks. Inumaki was born with the snake and fang seal of the Inumaki clan on his tongue and both cheeks, Gojo explained, noticing Izuku's curious gaze. His vocabulary is limited to rice ball ingredients, so good luck talking to him. As if on cue, Inumaki muttered, kelp, his voice muffled by the collar. Despite the odd word choice, Izuku sensed a friendly tone in Inumaki's voice. Izuku blinked, trying to process this information. He wondered how someone could communicate effectively with such a limited vocabulary, but he was intrigued by the challenge it presented. Maybe there was more to Inumaki's speech than met the eye. Finally, Gojo gestured towards the panda. And this is, well, Panda. The panda raised a paw in greeting, its movements surprisingly fluid for such a large creature. I'm Panda. Nice to meet ya. It said in a voice that was rough yet soft, a strange combination that seemed to fit its appearance perfectly. Izuku's jaw dropped slightly, his eyes widening in surprise. He had been prepared for many strange things in this new world of curses and jujitsu, but a talking panda was still enough to catch him off guard. He closed his mouth quickly, not wanting to seem rude, but couldn't hide the amazement in his eyes. Come to think about it, we'll live in a world with weird quirks, he thought. Well, that's about it, Gojo said, tapping his chin thoughtfully. His ever-present smile seemed to widen as he observed the bewildered look on Izuku's face. Izuku couldn't help but deadpan internally. So there's no explanation for the one I'm most curious about, he thought, his eyes still fixed on the talking panda. He had so many questions. Was Panda a cursed spirit? A transformed human? Or something else entirely? But given the day's events so far, he decided it might be best to save those questions for later. Including you. That makes 4 first years, Gojo announced, his voice carrying a hint of excitement that made Izuku both curious and nervous. Izuku glanced around at his new classmates, taking in the strange group he now found himself a part of. 3 humans and 1. Well, Panda. The oddity of the situation wasn't lost on him, and he couldn't help but marvel at the surreal nature of it all. Our afternoon practical jujitsu class will be conducted in pairs, Gojo continued, clapping his hands together. The sound echoed in the classroom, drawing everyone's attention. This will give you a chance to learn from each other and develop your skills together. Think of it as a buddy system, but with more cursed energy and potential danger. He pointed at Inumaki and Panda, his long fingers directed at the odd duo. Toge and Panda, you two will pair up. Inumaki nodded silently, then muttered salmon under his breath. Izuku wasn't sure if that was an agreement or just Inumaki's usual way of speaking. Panda, on the other hand, gave an enthusiastic thumbs up, his furry face somehow managing to look excited. Then, with a mischievous glint in his eye that Izuku could somehow sense despite the blindfold, Gojo turned to the remaining students. Maki and Izuku, you'll be working together. Gah! Maki shouted, her face contorting in frustration. She glared at Gojo, then at Izuku, her golden eyes narrowing behind her glasses. The intensity of her gaze made Izuku want to shrink into his chair. F me, Izuku thought, his heart sinking. He'd hoped for a fresh start at Jujutsu High, a chance to reinvent himself and leave behind the pain of his past. But it seemed like his luck hadn't changed. The universe, it appeared, had other plans for him. As they all filed out of the classroom, the tension from earlier still hung in the air like a heavy fog. Izuku's mind was racing, a whirlwind of frustration and determination battling inside him. The corridor seemed to stretch endlessly before them, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows that mirrored the unease in Izuku's heart. Despite his initial anger at the pairing, Izuku decided to make an effort. After all, wasn't this what he had come here for? To face challenges head-on and become stronger? Taking a deep breath, he steeled himself and turned to Maki. His teal eyes, filled with a mix of apprehension and resolve, met her golden ones. "I'm looking forward to working with you," Izuku said, his voice steady despite the inner turmoil he felt. His teal eyes met Maki's golden ones, searching for any sign of friendliness. Maki's piercing gaze locked onto Izuku, studying him intently. Her eyes narrowed behind her glasses as if she were trying to see through him. The fluorescent lights of the hallway cast harsh shadows across her face, accentuating her sharp features. After a moment that felt like an eternity, she spoke, her voice laced with a mix of curiosity and disdain. "You were bullied, weren't you?" The question hit Izuku like a punch to the gut. He felt a tick mark forming on his forehead as he struggled to maintain his composure. Any hope of camaraderie vanished in an instant. The hallway suddenly felt too small, too confining, as if the walls were closing in on him. The chatter of other students faded into the background, leaving only the sound of his heartbeat pounding in his ears. "Thought so," Maki continued, a smirk playing on her lips. She twirled her naginata casually, the weapon glinting menacingly in the fluorescent lights of the hallway. The smooth motion of the blade through the air seemed to cut through the tension. "I'd totally pick on you, too. You're being protected. So why play the victim? I wonder if it's because of the curse. You act like a good person, but it feels fake. It's gross. I bet you've been passive your whole life, without any goals. Jujutsu high ain't that easy." Izuku felt multiple tick marks appearing now, his teeth gritting as he fought to keep his anger in check. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, knuckles turning white. The fabric of his uniform crinkled under the pressure. "Yup, I hate this woman already," he thought bitterly, the words echoing in his mind. The tension in the air was palpable as Izuku and Maki glared at each other, their eyes locked in a silent battle of wills. Izuku's teal eyes blazed with a mix of frustration and determination, while Maki's golden orbs sparkled with defiance behind her glasses. The atmosphere in the hallway crackled with unspoken hostility, so thick you could almost cut it with a knife. Panda and Inumaki exchanged worried glances, sensing the brewing storm between their new classmates. Panda's fur bristled slightly, while Inumaki's fingers twitched nervously at his sides. The standoff might have continued indefinitely if not for their intervention. Panda, his large furry form surprisingly agile, stepped between the two. He placed a gentle but firm paw on Izuku's shoulder, carefully pulling him back from the confrontation. "That's enough, Maki," Panda said sternly, his gruff voice carrying a note of exasperation. He turned his head, looking between Izuku and Maki with his round, expressive eyes. "We're all classmates here. Let's try to get along, okay?" His words were calm, but there was an underlying firmness that suggested he wouldn't tolerate any more hostility. Inumaki, who had been observing the exchange with growing concern, decided to add his thoughts. "Fish flakes," he exclaimed, his words muffled by his high collar, but his tone disapproving. His purple eyes darted between Maki and Izuku, silently urging them to calm down. Of words, his meaning was clear. This conflict needed to end. Maki held her glare for a moment longer, her grip on the naginata tightening. The weapon seemed to hum with energy, reflecting its wielder's tension. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, she let out a frustrated sigh. She reached up and scratched her hair, musing her neat ponytail slightly. "Fine. Whatever," she grumbled, crossing her arms over her chest as she kept walking. Despite her words, there was a flicker of something in her eyes, perhaps curiosity, or a grudging respect for Izuku's refusal to back down. As Maki walked away, the tension in the hallway slowly dissipated. Izuku's shoulders relaxed slightly, but his mind was still racing. He couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was just the beginning of a complicated relationship with his new classmate. As they continued down the hallway, the tension slowly dissipated. Panda, his large furry form surprisingly graceful, fell in a step beside Izuku. "Sorry about that," he said, his voice a low, comforting rumble. "Maki can be a little harsh sometimes. Don't take it personally, okay?" Izuku's shoulders slumped slightly, the fight draining out of him. He glanced at Maki's retreating back, her ponytail swaying with each determined step, then back at Panda's concerned eyes. "It's fine," he said quietly, a hint of resignation in his voice. "She's not wrong, you know. I've been through a lot." Panda nodded sympathetically, placing a gentle paw on Izuku's shoulder. "We all have our struggles, Izuku. What matters is how we choose to face them." Time skip. Abandoned elementary school. The sun was setting as Izuku and Maki approached the dilapidated entrance of the abandoned school. The building loomed before them, its once cheerful facade now a haunting reminder of better days. Paint peeled from the walls in long, curling strips, and cracked windows stared out like hollow eyes. "Is this really the place?" Izuku asked Gojo, his voice tinged with disbelief and a hint of apprehension. The eerie silence that surrounded the building sent a shiver down his spine. Gojo's voice carried its usual mischievous tone as he replied, a smirk playing on his lips. "It's just a normal elementary school. An ordinary school, where children go missing." His words hung in the air, heavy with implication. "Go missing?" Izuku screamed, his eyes widening in shock. His heart raced as he imagined the terror those children must have felt, lost and alone in this decaying structure. Gojo nodded, his expression hidden behind his blindfold. "A school is just a school. So, the disappearances are most likely due to a naturally formed curse." Izuku swallowed hard, his mind racing with possibilities. "So, you're saying the kids were abducted by a curse?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, as if afraid the very walls might be listening. "Yep, 2 of them." Gojo replied, his casual tone a stark contrast to the gravity of the situation. He stood there, hands in his pockets, as if discussing the weather rather than missing children. Maki, who had been silently observing their surroundings, spoke up. Her golden eyes scanned the building, alert for any signs of danger. "Places with a lot of memories tend to be hotbeds for curses," she said matter-of-factly, adjusting the case that held her naginata. The weapon seemed to hum with anticipation. Gojo nodded, his silver hair catching the dim light of the setting sun. "Schools and hospitals are frequently thought of. Each time, they absorb negative emotions." He paused, letting his words sink in. "As these emotions accumulate, curses form, as happened here." Suddenly, Gojo's demeanor changed. His voice took on a solemn tone as he began to chant, the words seeming to vibrate in the air around them. "That which frightens more than darkness itself. That which is darker than black. Purify this defilement." Izuku felt a chill run down his spine, goosebumps rising on his arms. "Is it just me, or is it getting darker?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. As if in response to his question, an inky barrier of black energy began to form around the school, enveloping it in an otherworldly shroud. The air grew thick and heavy, pressing down on them. "This is the veil," Gojo explained, placing a reassuring hand on Izuku's shoulder. "It makes the school invisible from the outside and causes curses to appear inside. Think of it as a stage for your test." Izuku's heart pounded in his chest as the reality of their situation began to sink in. Gojo's next words did little to calm his nerves. "Solve the problem from within. It should be manageable," Gojo said as he walked back towards the entrance, his footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. The veil continued to close around them, the outside world fading from view. Just before the veil closed completely, Gojo turned back to them with a grin that seemed to glow in the growing darkness. "All right then, I genuinely hope you don't die, Sensei," Izuku shouted, panic evident in his voice. But it was too late. The veil closed with a soft whoosh, sealing Izuku and Maki inside the cursed school. The air inside felt different, charged with an energy that made the hairs on the back of Izuku's neck stand on end. Maki's voice cut through Izuku's panic, sharp and focused. "Newbie, don't look away," she said firmly, her hands moving swiftly to assemble her naginata from its case. The weapon gleamed in the dim light, a beacon of hope in the darkness that surrounded them. As Izuku and Maki cautiously stepped further into the abandoned school, their eyes adjusted to the dim light. The hallway stretched before them, littered with fallen debris and forgotten memories. Suddenly, they froze in their tracks. Before them stood three grotesque entities that could only be described as curses. The creatures had elongated, bird-like bodies that seemed to defy natural anatomy. Their torsos were marked with stitched seams as if they had been crudely sewn together by some mad puppeteer. Thin, elongated limbs dangled from their bodies, twitching and jerking in unnatural movements that made Izuku's stomach churn. What struck Izuku the most was their heads. Unlike any creature he had ever seen, these curses lacked traditional facial features. Instead, their heads were smooth, eyeless surfaces that somehow seemed to be watching them intently. The absence of eyes made them even more unnerving, as if they could perceive their surroundings through some otherworldly sense. Izuku felt a chill run down his spine as he observed the curses. Their bodies seemed to shimmer and shift in the dim light, making it difficult to focus on any one part of them. The air around them felt heavy and oppressive, charged with malevolent energy that seemed to suck the warmth from the room. "What the hell are those things?" Izuku whispered, his voice barely audible, fear constricting his throat. Maki gripped her naginata tightly, her knuckles turning white. Her face was a mask of concentration, but Izuku could see a flicker of concern in her golden eyes. "Those are Grade 2 curses," she replied, her voice low and tense. As if sensing their presence, the curses began to move towards them, their movements jerky and unpredictable. One of the curses used its elongated, skeletal hands to tear open its torso, revealing a jagged, red-tinged maw that seemed to grin at them. The sight was horrifying, and Izuku felt his stomach lurch. "Come in," it croaked, its voice a rasping whisper that echoed in the hallway, seeming to come from everywhere at once. "Go, me." And the other curses joined in, their eyeless heads swiveling towards Izuku and Maki as they advanced, a cacophony of distorted voices filling the air. Izuku's heart raced, his palms sweaty as he gripped the hem of his shirt. The curse's grotesque form seemed to warp and twist in the dim light, making them even more terrifying. He glanced at Maki, hoping for some guidance, some reassurance in the face of this nightmare. "They're coming this way," Izuku exclaimed, his voice cracking with fear. What should we do?" His mind raced with possible strategies, but fear clouded his thoughts. Maki, however, remained calm. Her golden eyes narrowed behind her glasses as she assessed the situation, her body tensing like a coiled spring. Without a word, she stepped forward, her naginata held firmly in both hands. The weapon gleamed in the faint light, a stark contrast to the darkness surrounding them. "Don't yell," Maki said, her voice steady and firm. She turned her head slightly, meeting Izuku's panicked gaze. There was a fierce determination in her eyes that made Izuku stand a little straighter. "Remember this. When it comes to curses," in a blur of motion, Maki spun around, her naginata whistling through the air. The blade sliced through the first curse, then the second, and finally the third in one fluid movement. Izuku watched in awe as her form flowed like water, each strike precise and powerful. It was as if she were performing a deadly dance, her movements graceful yet lethal. The curses let out inhuman shrieks as they dissolved into wisps of dark energy, dissipating into the air like smoke. In mere seconds, the entrance was empty, except for Izuku and Maki. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by their heavy breathing. Maki turned to Izuku, her eyes blazing with determination. "The weak ones always come in swarms. That applies to humans as well," Maki said, her voice laced with a hint of bitterness. She glanced at Izuku, searching his face for understanding, but quickly averted her gaze. Izuku's eyes widened, a mix of awe and admiration illuminating his features. "Wow, you took them out in one swing," he exclaimed, excitement bubbling over in his voice. "That was incredible, Maki-san." A faint smile tugged at the corners of Maki's lips in response to his enthusiasm. Resting her naginata casually on her shoulder, she seemed unfazed by the weight of the weapon. "Come on," she said, turning her back to him and striding toward the school building. "Let's go." Izuku hesitated, his earlier exhilaration fading into uncertainty. He looked at the imposing structure before them, its darkened windows resembling hollow eyes staring back at him. Where exactly?" he asked, a hint of anxiety threading through his voice. Maki paused and turned back to him, her expression a mix of determination and mild exasperation. "Inside the school, of course," she replied, gesturing toward the entrance with her free hand. "That's where we'll find the source of these curses." Izuku swallowed hard, his gaze flickering between Maki and the foreboding school. He clenched his fists, steeling his resolve. "Right," he said, nodding firmly as he took a deep breath, ready to follow her lead. Scene change. Izuku and Maki crept down the dimly lit hallway of the abandoned elementary school, their footsteps echoing softly against the worn linoleum floors. The air hung heavy with an unsettling stillness, broken only by the occasional creak of the old building settling. Flickering fluorescent lights cast eerie, dancing shadows on the walls, transforming innocent classroom decorations into menacing shapes. Izuku's heart thundered in his chest, each beat seeming to reverberate through the empty corridor. His eyes darted nervously from one corner to another, searching for any sign of supernatural activity. His palms were slick with sweat, and he found himself unconsciously inching closer to Maki as they walked. "Hey, aren't you scared, Zenin-san?" Izuku whispered, his voice quivering slightly. He glanced at his companion, marveling at her seemingly unshakable composure. Maki's eyes flashed with irritation, her lips pressing into a thin line. She turned to face Izuku, her gaze sharp and unyielding. "Don't call me by my last name," she snapped, her tone crisp and controlled. Despite the harshness of her words, there was an underlying note of weariness, as if she'd had this conversation many times before. Izuku flinched, his body tensing as he realized his mistake. "Oh, sorry, Maki-san," he stammered, his cheeks flushing a deep crimson. He rubbed the back of his neck nervously, his eyes darting around the dimly lit corridor. "It's just, there's this eerie feeling, like we're not alone. I can sense remnants of something." The abandoned school's atmosphere was thick with an unsettling silence, broken only by their footsteps echoing off the grimy walls. Dust motes danced in the weak beams of light filtering through cracked windows, giving the air a hazy, dreamlike quality. As they continued their cautious trek down the corridor, neither of them noticed the dark, shapeless mass that slithered silently along the ceiling. It moved with an unnatural fluidity, trailing them like a shadow given life, its presence masked by the oppressive gloom that seemed to cling to every surface. Maki's brow furrowed in concentration, her sharp eyes scanning their surroundings. The weight of her naginata in her hands was reassuring, but something felt off. Despite the veil, there aren't many curses around, she thought, her grip tightening on the weapon's shaft. The wood creaked softly under her fingers. "No, wait. There are. They just aren't attacking." Her gaze flicked towards Izuku, who was still frantically scanning their surroundings. His emerald eyes were wide with a mix of fear and determination, his body coiled like a spring ready to unleash at any moment. Sweat beaded on his forehead, glistening in the dim light. "Is it because of the newbie?" Maki wondered, observing Izuku's tense posture. There was something about him, an aura perhaps, that seemed to keep the curses at bay. It was both intriguing and unsettling. She watched as Izuku's gaze darted from one shadowy corner to another, his fingers flexing nervously at his sides. Despite his obvious fear, there was a steely resolve in his eyes that Maki couldn't help but admire. It was the look of someone who had faced their fears before and come out stronger. "Hey," Maki said, her voice softer than before, yet still carrying an undercurrent of authority. The sudden change in her tone caught Izuku off guard, causing him to jump slightly, his messy green hair bouncing with the movement. "Why, yes," Izuku exclaimed, his emerald eyes wide with a mix of surprise and nervousness. He could feel his heart racing, unsure of what to expect from his intense classmate. Maki's gaze was steady as she asked, "What grade level are you?" Her brown eyes bore into him, searching for an answer. "Huh?" Izuku's face scrunched up in confusion, his freckles bunching together as his mind raced. "Does she mean English proficiency?" he thought, feeling a bit lost. His hands fidgeted with the hem of his uniform, a nervous habit he'd never quite shaken. Seeing his bewilderment, Maki elaborated, her tone patient but firm. The afternoon sun streaming through the nearby window cast a warm glow on her face, softening her usually stern features. Jujutsu sorcerers are assigned grades ranging from 4 to 1, with 1 being the highest. It's a measure of our abilities and potential. Izuku's shoulders slumped slightly, his earlier enthusiasm dampened by the realization of how little he knew. The weight of his inexperience seemed to press down on him. "But I just got to Jujutsu High," he said dejectedly, his voice barely above a whisper. He felt small and out of place, like a sapling among towering trees. Maki sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. The light glinted off her glasses as she adjusted them. "Forget it. Just show me your school ID." Izuku patted his pockets, a look of mild panic crossing his face. His hands moved frantically, searching every fold of his uniform. "Don't think I got one," he mumbled, more to himself than to Maki. The rustle of fabric filled the air as he continued his search. "You ain't got one from the blindfolded idiot?" Maki asked, her eyebrow raised in disbelief. A hint of amusement crept into her voice, despite her attempts to maintain her serious demeanor. "Blindfolded idiot?" Izuku repeated, a bead of sweat forming on his forehead as he realized she was referring to their eccentric teacher, Gojo. He couldn't help but picture the tall, white-haired man with his ever-present sunglasses and carefree attitude. After a moment of frantic searching, Izuku's hand closed around something in his pocket. The smooth, cool surface of plastic met his fingertips. "Oh!" he exclaimed, relief washing over his features like a wave. He pulled out a small card, its surface still glossy and new, reflecting the afternoon light. Maki snatched the ID from Izuku's hand, her movements quick but not unkind. Her eyes scanned the card, a frown forming on her face. The sound of her fingers tapping against the plastic filled the brief silence. "Well, if you have no experience at all, you should be a grade 4, she said, more to herself than to Izuku. Suddenly, her eyes widened, and she inhaled sharply. The card nearly slipped from her fingers as she stared at it in disbelief. "Special grade?" she exclaimed mentally, her composed exterior cracking for a moment. The world seemed to slow down around her as the implications of what she was seeing sank in. Maki's mind raced as she stared at the ID, her grip on the card tightening. The plastic creaked slightly under the pressure. "Special grade is higher than a grade 1. This has to be some sort of joke," she thought, her eyes darting between the card and Izuku's confused face. Izuku's voice cracked with panic, his emerald eyes widening in terror. He pointed frantically behind Maki, his hand trembling uncontrollably. "Behind you!" Maki spun around, her reflexes honed by years of rigorous training, while the word died in her throat as she beheld the monstrous curse that now filled the entire hallway. It was a writhing mass of darkness, its form constantly shifting and bubbling like some nightmarish liquid. The air grew thick with an oppressive aura, making it hard to breathe. Before either of them could react, the curse lashed out with tendrils of inky blackness. The force of the attack sent both Maki and Izuku hurtling through the air, debris from the crumbling school building raining down around them. The sound of shattering glass and cracking concrete filled their ears as they were propelled outside. The cool night air rushed past them, a stark contrast to the stifling atmosphere inside the cursed school. Izuku's world spun, his vision blurring into a kaleidoscope of shadows and moonlight. The last thing he saw before losing consciousness was Maki's determined face as she reached for her weapon mid-flight, her eyes blazing with fierce resolve. "Damn it," Maki growled, her fingers closing around her naginata. She twisted in the air, trying to orient herself as the ground rushed up to meet them. Her eyes darted between the approaching earth and the massive curse that was now emerging from the ruins of the school, its form growing more defined and terrifying with each passing second. The curse's form solidified as it moved, revealing a grotesque, vaguely humanoid shape. Its skin was a sickly gray, riddled with pulsing veins of dark energy that seemed to throb with malevolent life. But what caught Maki's attention was its mouth, a gaping maw filled with row upon row of jagged, yellowed teeth, each as long as her arm. "Kinda big, aren't you?" Maki shouted, her voice a mix of defiance and grim humor. She brandished her naginata, the weapon glinting in the moonlight as she readied herself to strike the moment she touched down. But the curse was faster. Its maw opened wider, impossibly wide, and Maki felt herself being pulled towards it by an unseen force. "Wah!" The exclamation was torn from her lips as she and the unconscious Izuku were drawn inexorably towards the creature's waiting mouth. The air around them distorted, warping like a heat haze as the curse felt a searing pain in her leg as one of the curse's teeth grazed her, leaving a deep laceration. She gritted her teeth, fighting against the pull with all her strength, her muscles straining with the effort. The wound burned like fire, but she pushed the pain aside, focusing on survival. "Thanks for the meal," the curse's voice rumbled, a sound like grinding stones that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Its breath was fetid, carrying the stench of decay and rot. With a sickening crunch that echoed through the night, the jaws snapped shut around them. Maki's last glimpse of the outside world was the starry sky, quickly obscured by rows of yellowed teeth. Darkness engulfed Maki and Izuku. The air was thick and putrid, making breathing difficult. Maki could feel something viscous and warm pressing in on all sides. They were in the curse's stomach. The darkness was almost complete, save for an eerie, pulsating glow emanating from the walls of flesh surrounding them. "Let us out of here." Maki yelled, her words more a battle cry than a plea. She knew the curse wouldn't comply, but the shout seemed to bolster her resolve. Turning her attention to Izuku, Maki's eyes blazed with a mix of desperation and irritation. "Where is that curse of yours when we need it?" she demanded, her voice sharp with urgency. Izuku winced at her tone, but replied calmly, "She has selective timing. Besides, she only comes out when I'm in danger." Maki's eyebrow twitched, a visible tick mark appearing on her forehead. "And what's to say being stuck inside a curse's stomach doesn't scream danger?" she retorted, her voice rising an octave higher. "An improvement," Izuku muttered under his breath, a hint of sarcasm coloring his words. The tension of their situation was bringing out a side of him rarely seen, a dry wit that served as his defense mechanism. Maki shot him a glare that could have melted steel, but Izuku held her gaze, refusing to back down. After a moment, she sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. "Once the veil deactivates, we can expect help," she said, more to herself than to Izuku. Then, almost inaudibly, she added, "So embarrassing. Help." A child's voice pierced through the slimy darkness, filled with desperation and fear. "Please, he's dying." Izuku squinted, his eyes struggling to adjust to the dim, reddish light inside the curse's stomach. The air was thick and humid, making it difficult to breathe. As his vision cleared, he saw two children huddled together in a corner, their small forms trembling. One, a boy no older than 10, had grotesque swellings covering half his face. His left eye was swollen shut and blackened, like a bruise gone wrong. In his arms, he cradled another child who lay motionless, their chest barely rising and falling with shallow breaths. "Oh no," Izuku whispered, his heart sinking like a stone in his chest. Were these the kids attacked by the curse? The two he knew about? His mind raced, trying to process the situation. The squishy, Pulsating walls of the curse's stomach seemed to close in around them, making the scene even more nightmarish. At least they're alive, he thought, clinging to a shred of hope like a lifeline in a stormy sea. Maki's voice cut through his thoughts, her tone grim and matter-of-fact. Not good. Take a closer look, Izuku. The bigger kids curse too. It's only a matter of time before they both. She trailed off mid-sentence, her words hanging in the air like a guillotine. Izuku turned to look at her, and what he saw made his vital fluid run cold. Maki's cheeks had drained of color, leaving her face looking pale and clammy as if a cold sweat had unexpectedly washed over her. Her usual confident demeanor was crumbling before his eyes, like a sandcastle against the tide. Besides, Maki continued, her voice growing weaker with each word, not everyone is resistant to curses like you. Just as Izuku opened his mouth to reply, he noticed Maki's eyes suddenly fluttering, her gaze losing focus as it rolled back into her head. Panic surged through him like an electric current as he saw her body start to sway dangerously, teetering on the brink of collapse. With a rush of adrenaline, Izuku instinctively lunged forward, his heart racing in his chest. As he closed the distance between them, he managed to grasp her just in time, his hands wrapping securely around her waist. He felt the warmth of her body against him as he anchored her, preventing her from falling to the ground. Maki, Izuku called out, panic rising in his chest like a tidal wave. He gently lowered her to the squishy floor, his eyes darting over her body. That's when he saw it. The wound on her leg, angry and inflamed, with dark tendrils spreading from it like poisonous vines creeping up a wall. Oh no, Izuku muttered, his face paling. That wound. It's been cursed. Is she going to die? Please, help us. The same kid pleaded, his voice trembling with fear and desperation. His eyes, wide and filled with unshed tears, darted between Maki's prone form and Izuku's face, silently begging for reassurance. Maki stirred, her eyelids fluttering like butterfly wings as she fought to regain consciousness. Her breathing was labored, each inhale a struggle against the pain coursing through her body. With a groan that seemed to come from the depths of her soul, she managed to open her eyes, but her gaze was unfocused, clouded by the effects of the curse. Summoning what little strength she had left, Maki reached out and grasped Izuku's white uniform tightly. Her fingers twisted into the fabric, knuckles turning white with the effort. When she spoke, her voice was hoarse and strained, barely above a whisper. Izuku, she rasped, her eyes suddenly clearing as they locked onto his with an intensity that made him flinch. Seriously, why'd you enroll at Jujutsu High? Izuku opened his mouth to respond, but Maki cut him off, her voice gaining strength as desperation and frustration fueled her words like kindling to a fire. To do what? She demanded, her grip on his uniform tightening. What did you want? What did you expect? Her outburst echoed in the slimy darkness, the raw emotion in her voice making Izuku flinch. He could see the pain in her eyes, not just physical but emotional too, like a window into her soul. The weight of her questions hung in the air, demanding answers. Izuku's black hair with green highlights cast shadows over his eyes as he lowered his head, lost in thought. The memories of his past, of the bullying and rejection, flashed through his mind like a painful slideshow. I tried to run away from my problems and disappear, he reflected, his inner voice tinged with regret and a hint of shame. Mini flashback. Gojo's piercing blue eyes softened as he looked at Izuku, his usual playful demeanor replaced by genuine concern. The sunlight glinted off his white hair, creating a halo-like effect around his head. But you'll be lonely, he said gently, his words hanging in the air between them, more of an observation than a question. The weight of those words had settled on Izuku's shoulders like a heavy cloak. Flashback ends. Izuku's brow furrowed as he recalled Gojo's words, his fingers absent-mindedly tracing the outline of Rika's ring. He said I'd be lonely, he thought, his chest tightening at the memory. The familiar ache of isolation threatened to overwhelm him. But then, I couldn't disagree at the time. But, suddenly, A kaleidoscope of memories burst forth in his mind, each one a vibrant reminder of the connections he'd forged. Itsuka's warm smile, her green eyes crinkling at the corners as she laughed at one of his awkward jokes. The Kendo family's welcoming embrace, their dojo filled with the rhythmic sounds of training and the occasional burst of encouraging shouts. He remembered the first time he'd successfully executed a complex move, the pride in Itsuka's father's eyes as he patted Izuku on the back. The smell of tea and homemade snacks that Itsuka's mother always prepared after their training sessions. The feeling of belonging had slowly begun to replace the emptiness in his heart, filling it with warmth and purpose. I found people who believed in me, Izuku realized, a small spark of hope igniting within him. It was like a tiny flame, fragile but persistent, pushing back the darkness that had surrounded him for so long. His teal eyes, once dim with despair, now blazed with newfound determination. He looked at Maki, her face pale and drawn with pain, but still fierce in her resolve. Izuku's voice rose with emotion, echoing in the eerie, pulsating space around them. I don't want people to see me as an outcast because I'm quirkless, he shouted, his words reverberating off the slimy walls of the curse's stomach. His fists clenched at his sides, trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the intensity of his feelings. The nails dug into his palms, grounding him in the moment. I want to be relied on by somebody. I want to believe that it's okay to keep living. His voice softened for a moment, vulnerable, yet resolute like a whisper carried on a strong wind. To be someone's hero again, and to become a top hero. Those are my goals. Maki's eyes widened slightly, surprised by the sudden outburst from the usually quiet Izuku. Despite her pain, a small, approving smile tugged at the corners of her lips. Her breathing was labored, but her gaze remained steady, locked onto Izuku's determined face. Then, start exorcising, Maki managed to say, her voice weak but filled with conviction. She reached out, grasping Izuku's sleeve weakly, her fingers trembling with the effort. Curses. You need to start exorcising them, and keep on exorcising them. Her eyes locked onto Izuku's, conveying a silent understanding that went beyond words. In that moment, they weren't just classmates or reluctant partners, but two people united in their determination to overcome the impossible. As for your own feelings and other people's respect, you'll be fine in due time, because those goals— She paused, taking a labored breath, her chest rising and falling with visible effort. That's what Jujutsu High is all about. With those final words, Maki's grip on Izuku's sleeve loosened, her fingers sliding away as her strength finally gave out. Her eyes fluttered closed, and she slumped against him, finally succumbing to unconsciousness. Izuku caught her hand before it fell, holding it gently as he processed her words. The weight of her trust settled on him, a burden and a gift all at once. The gravity of the situation hit him like a punch to the gut, stealing his breath for a moment. Maki, unconscious and cursed, her usually strong form now limp and vulnerable. The two children, one barely holding on, the other not far behind, their small bodies dwarfed by the horrific environment around them. All of them are trapped inside a monstrous curse with no apparent way out, surrounded by pulsating flesh and the sickening sounds of digestive processes. Izuku's hand moved to his chest, fingers closing around the necklace he always wore. The metal was warm against his skin, a constant reminder of what he carried with him. Hanging from it was a simple ring, Rika's ring. He'd carried it with him for years, a tangible connection to his lost friend and the power she'd left him. It was both a comfort and a burden, a reminder of love and loss. With trembling fingers, Izuku unclasped the necklace and slid the ring off. He stared at it for a moment, memories of Rika flashing through his mind like a bittersweet slideshow. Her smile was bright and carefree, lighting up even the darkest days. Her kindness, always reaching out to him when others turned away. And then, the terrible day he lost her, the screeching of tires, and the sickening thud that haunted his nightmares. "All right, Rika," Izuku whispered, his voice barely audible over the grotesque, squelching sounds of the curse's stomach. His words were a prayer, a plea, and a promise all rolled into one. I need you now, more than ever. Lend me your power. Taking a deep breath, filling his lungs with the fetid air around him, Izuku slipped the ring onto his finger. For a moment, nothing happened. The world held its breath, suspended in a moment of terrible anticipation. Then, a familiar warmth spread through his body, starting from the ring and flowing outward like liquid fire in his veins. The air around him began to shimmer, reality itself seeming to bend and warp. He felt a surge of strength and determination, as if Rika herself was standing beside him, lending him her strength. Hang on, everyone, Izuku said, his voice steady and filled with newfound resolve. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach, but it was overshadowed by his determination. He looked at his unconscious companions, their lives now in his hands. I'm going to get us out of here. The curse's stomach erupted in an explosion, sending a shower of viscera and dark energy in all directions. From the carnage emerged Rika, her form both terrifying and awe-inspiring. Her long, dark hair whipped around her like living tendrils, each strand seeming to have a mind of its own. Her eyes, once warm and kind, now glowed with an otherworldly light that promised both protection and destruction. Rika's emergence was accompanied by a bone-chilling screech that echoed through the air, a sound that was equal parts fury and triumph. The very atmosphere seemed to tremble in her presence, the air growing heavy and charged with an electric tension. The curse, faced with this unexpected and overwhelming force, recoiled in confusion and fear. Its grotesque form quivered, and when it spoke, its voice was a guttural croak filled with uncertainty. "Huh, who are you?" It had never encountered anything like Rika before, and its usual confidence was shattered in the face of this new threat. Rika's response was swift and brutal, showcasing the raw power at her command. With a speed that defied human comprehension, she lashed out. Her clawed hand, now a weapon of terrible efficiency, connected with the curse's face. The impact was thunderous, sending shockwaves rippling through the air. The sound of the collision was like a crack of lightning, followed by the rumble of distant thunder. "Shut up!" Rika screeched, her voice echoing with a power that seemed to shake the very foundations of reality. The curse reeled back, overwhelmed not just by the physical blow, but by the sheer ferocity and strength that Rika exuded. Outside the veil that separated this nightmarish realm from the normal world, Gojo stood leaning casually against a sleek black car. His white hair ruffled gently in the breeze, a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding before him. His ever-present sunglasses hid his eyes, but there was a hint of a smirk playing on his lips as he observed the scene. So this is the true identity of the special-grade vengeful curse spirit Rika Orimoto. Gojo mused, his tone a curious mix of interest and amusement. He seemed almost impressed as he added, "Freaky." Rika, sensing a new presence, turned towards Gojo. Vital fluid dripped from her clawed hand, each droplet sizzling as it hit the ground. Her face, once beautiful in life, was now twisted into a grotesque grin that was both alluring and terrifying. "Rika likes Ard," she declared, her voice guttural and inhuman, each word dripping with a pang of primal hunger. Gojo chuckled lightly, seemingly unfazed by the horrific display before him. His casual demeanor was a stark contrast to the intensity of the situation. "Women sure are scary," he said, his tone light and playful, as if he were commenting on a mildly interesting TV show rather than a battle between supernatural forces. Meanwhile, within the dissipating remains of the curse, Izuku was engaged in a desperate struggle. His muscles strained to their limits as he carried his injured companions. Maki was draped over his back, her arms loosely wrapped around his neck, her usually strong frame now limp and vulnerable. Against his sides, he cradled the two children, their small bodies feeling impossibly heavy in his exhausted state. Sweat beaded on Izuku's forehead, running down his face in rivulets. His breath came in short, sharp gasps as he pushed forward, each step a monumental effort. The remnants of the curse clung to his feet, making each movement a battle against the viscous, clinging substance. Everyone, just a little more, Izuku panted, his voice filled with determination despite his exhaustion. His eyes were fixed on the shimmering edge of the veil ahead, their gateway to safety tantalizingly close, yet seeming to stretch further away with each labored step. As they neared their goal, Izuku felt his grip on his companions begin to slip. The combination of fatigue and the slick remains of the curse made it increasingly difficult to maintain his hold. "Don't fall. Not yet," he pleaded, more to himself than to his unconscious companions. He gritted his teeth, the muscles in his jaw clenching as he redoubled his efforts. With each step, the veil grew closer, but so did the overwhelming tide of exhaustion. Izuku's vision began to blur, the edges of his sight growing dark. His legs trembled beneath him, threatening to give out at any moment. But deep within him, a stubborn spark of determination refused to be extinguished. "I can do it," he shouted, his voice hoarse but filled with unwavering resolve. The words echoed in the eerie space, a defiant cry against the encroaching darkness. In a final, Herculean burst of strength, Izuku lunged forward. Time seemed to slow as they approached the veil, each second stretching into an eternity. Then, with a sensation like passing through a wall of cold water, they broke through. The veil shimmered and disappeared, leaving them sprawled on the hard ground at the entrance of the abandoned school. The sudden transition from the nightmarish realm to the normal world was jarring. The air felt cleaner and lighter, and the oppressive atmosphere of the curse's domain lifted like a heavy blanket being pulled away. Gojo approached the group, his usual carefree demeanor tinged with a hint of respect. "Welcome back," he said, looking down at the exhausted forms on the ground. His voice carried a warmth that belied his casual stance. "You did it." Izuku, his last reserves of strength finally depleted, managed a weak smile. His eyes, filled with relief and exhaustion, met Gojo's for a brief moment before fluttering closed. As consciousness slipped away, a sense of accomplishment washed over him. They had survived, against all odds, and he had protected those entrusted to him. As darkness enveloped Izuku, his final thoughts were of relief and determination. They were safe, for now at least, but he knew this was just the beginning. With that thought echoing in his mind, Izuku surrendered to exhaustion, his body finally allowing itself to rest after the harrowing ordeal. Time skip. Hospital. The fluorescent lights flickered softly in the sterile hospital room, casting a clinical glow over the scene. The air was heavy with the scent of disinfectant and the faint beeping of medical equipment. Gojo leaned against the wall, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the linoleum floor. His arms were crossed, and despite his ever-present sunglasses, his expression was a mix of relief and lingering concern. "They said that Maki and the kids will be fine," he stated, his voice steady yet laced with the tension of the situation. His fingers drummed lightly against his arm, betraying a hint of restlessness. Izuku sat up in the hospital bed, the thin mattress creaking beneath him. His green hair was tousled, and dark circles shadowed his eyes, a testament to the ordeal they had just endured. His brow furrowed as he processed the news, the weight of recent events visible in the slump of his shoulders. "Good," he replied, but the unease in his voice betrayed his outward calmness. His fingers twisted the thin hospital blanket, a nervous habit he couldn't quite shake. Gojo tilted his head slightly, studying Izuku's face. The fluorescent light glinted off his white hair as he moved. "You don't seem very relieved," he pointed out, his tone shifting to gentle curiosity. He could see the worry etched in Izuku's features, the slight downturn of his mouth, the crease between his brows. Izuku's gaze dropped to his hand, where Rika's ring glinted under the dim light. He twisted it absently, feeling the cool metal against his skin. "For the second time, I summoned Rika," he stated, his voice laced with a mix of resolve and uncertainty. The memory of their first encounter during the chaotic sludge villain incident flashed through his mind, a moment that felt both distant and hauntingly fresh. Gojo nodded slowly, aware of the weight that rested on Izuku's shoulders. "That's a step in the right direction," he replied, his tone encouraging yet laced with caution. He knew the complexities of summoning and the emotional turbulence it often brought along. His own experiences with powerful techniques flickered through his mind. Izuku's brow furrowed deeper, his green eyes clouded with thought. He chewed his lower lip, contemplating the implications of his connection with Rika. Maybe Rika isn't the one cursing me. Maybe I'm the one who is cursing Rika instead, he mused aloud, shaking his head slightly as if trying to dislodge the troubling thoughts. The guilt of the situation was evident in his voice, which cracked slightly on Rika's name. Gojo pushed off from the wall, hands sliding into his pockets as he considered Izuku's words. He moved to the window, gazing out at the city skyline barely visible in the fading daylight. "I have always believed that love can manifest the most distorted curses," he remarked, his gaze piercing yet understanding as he turned back to Izuku. The setting sun cast long shadows across his face, adding a somber tone to his words. "Sensei," Izuku exclaimed suddenly, his voice rising in urgency. He sat up straighter, wincing slightly at the movement. His hand clenched tightly around his ring finger, the metal of the ring digging into his skin. The determination burning in his eyes was unmistakable. It was a look Gojo had seen before in those who were ready to face their demons head-on. Izuku's chest heaved with a deep breath, steadying himself before he continued. The heart monitor beside his bed beeped a little faster, matching his rising emotions. "I am going to unravel Rika's curse at Jujutsu High," he declared, his voice steady as his resolve cemented. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with promise and determination. Gojo's eyebrows raised slightly above his sunglasses, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. He recognized the fire in Izuku's eyes, the unwavering determination that could move mountains. It reminded him of his own younger days, of the challenges he had faced and overcome. "That's quite the declaration, Izuku," Gojo said, his voice a mix of pride and concern. He moved closer to the bed, his tall frame casting a shadow over Izuku. "Unraveling a curse, especially one as powerful as Rika's, won't be easy. It'll take everything you've got, and then some." Izuku nodded, his jaw set in determination, his hands unclenched, smoothing out the blanket across his lap. "I know, Sensei, but I have to try. For Rika's sake. And my own." His voice was quiet but firm, filled with a resolve that seemed to make him appear larger than his hospital bed. Gojo moved closer, placing a reassuring hand on Izuku's shoulder. The warmth of the touch seemed to ground Izuku, providing a moment of comfort in the clinical setting. "Well then, we'd better make sure you're prepared. When you're discharged, we'll start your specialized training. You're going to need every tool in the jujitsu arsenal if you want to tackle this." Izuku looked up at his teacher, gratitude shining in his eyes. The setting sun streaming through the window cast a warm glow across his face, highlighting the mix of determination and hope in his expression. "Thank you, Sensei. I won't let you down." Morning. Iron Claw Dojo. The early morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the Iron Claw Dojo, casting a warm, golden glow on the polished wooden floors. Itsuka sat cross-legged on a training mat, her fingers poised over her phone's screen, the light reflecting off the device. Gone was her usual side ponytail. Instead, her loose copper-colored hair framed her face, accentuating the worry etched across her features. She scrolled through her contacts, her heart sinking as she found Izuku's name. A wave of hesitation washed over her, and she stared at his number, her mind racing with thoughts. With a heavy sigh, she glanced at the calendar hanging on the wall, its pages marking yet another day of silence between them. "It's been 3 months since he last called me," she thought, her brow furrowing deeper with concern. What could he possibly be doing? Closing her eyes, she tried to recall their last meeting. She could almost see his determined smile, hear his promise to stay in touch, and feel his excitement as he spoke about finding a new house. But now, all she had was silence, a void that felt increasingly heavy in her heart. Rising to her feet, Itsuka stretched her arms high above her head, the morning light glinting off her senior student armband. She walked over to the window and gazed out at the peaceful street below, where the world outside seemed blissfully unaware of her turmoil. "Maybe I should call him," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile calm. "But what if he's just busy? What if I'm overreacting?" With a renewed sense of determination, she picked up her phone once more, her finger hovering hesitantly over Izuku's number. The moments stretched out, filled with uncertainty, until she finally set the phone down again, her resolve wavering. "I hope you're staying safe, Izuku," she said softly, her words echoing in the stillness of the empty dojo. "And I hope you still remember us." As she turned away from the window, Itsuka felt a flicker of hope amidst her worry, a quiet belief that perhaps, one day soon, she would hear from him again. Scene change. A soft, ethereal glow enveloped the room, reminiscent of a whispering moonlight, crafting an atmosphere steeped in calm and serenity. The ornate hanging light, suspended gracefully from the ceiling, cast a warm, golden hue across the polished wooden floor, forming intricate patterns of light and shadow that danced in harmony. For traditional shoji screens adorned the walls, their elegant rice paper panels diffusing the gentle light, deepening the tranquil and refined ambience. The interplay of light and shadow, dappled across the ground and playing upon the structures of the room, created a mesmerizing effect that seamlessly bridged the modern and the ancient Japanese aesthetic. In the heart of this serene environment stood Gojo, a striking figure exuding power and confidence, a marked contrast to the calm that surrounded him. His sleek black aviator sunglasses, concealing his eyes, reflected only a mysterious gleam, adding to his enigmatic presence. A fitted black zip-up jacket, sleek and exuding sophistication, hugged his athletic frame, the fabric glistening slightly in the soft light. Beneath it, a simple yet stylish black t-shirt accentuated his form, enhancing his effortlessly cool demeanor. His tailored dark blue jeans completed his look, carefully chosen to allow him to blend seamlessly in any urban setting while maintaining an air of refined elegance. The tension in the air was almost tangible as one of the elders spoke, his voice grave, filled with a palpable concern. Complete manifestation in 422 seconds. Special grade vengeful cursed spirit Rika Orimoto, he announced, a grim weight behind each word. Another elder quickly followed, his tone sharp and accusatory. "We entrusted that boy to you specifically to prevent such a situation, Gojo." The discontent was unmistakable, their disappointment hanging heavily in the air. Gojo's hand drifted casually to the back of his head, scratching idly in a gesture that suggested both ease and a tinge of discomfort. "Well, to be honest," he began, his voice laced with an air of nonchalance that only served to infuriate the elders further. "I wasn't planning on making any promises." The third elder's patience snapped, his expression shifting from concern to fury. "Enough of your flippancy, Gojo," he thundered, his wrinkled face contorting with unrestrained anger. If Rika Orimoto's rampage had continued unchecked, an entire town could have been reduced to rubble. The gravity of the situation was undeniable, and for the first time, the serene glow of the room felt overshadowed by the looming threat that lay just beyond the fragile boundary of their peace. "Whoa, easy there, Gramps," Gojo said, raising his hands in mock surrender, a playful grin dancing on his lips. The tension in the room felt almost tangible as laughter hung in the air, but it evaporated quickly when he saw the elder's face turn an alarming shade of crimson. "This is not a joke, Gojo," the elder barked, his voice trembling with indignation. Gojo shifted from his jesting tone to something far more somber, his expression becoming serious. "Never said it was. We're facing unknowns here." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to sink in before continuing. "How did a girl with no family history of sorcery become such an immensely powerful curse? It's unprecedented." His eyes narrowed as he contemplated the implications, the gravity of the situation pressing down on them like a heavy fog. "But I can assure you of one thing. I would have risked my life to stop it if it became necessary." "That's not good enough," the second elder interjected, his voice sharp, cutting through the air like a knife. We need a plan, not your bravado. Frustration seeped into Gojo's voice as he replied, "You're all trying to control something you don't understand. The only way we can learn about this phenomenon is through trial and error. So, I suggest you leave it alone and let me handle it." "And how do you propose to handle it?" the first elder asked, his skepticism dripping from every word like thick molasses. "By doing what I do best," Gojo said, flashing a cocky smirk that betrayed his confidence. "Winging it with style." As he turned to leave, his movements smooth and deliberate, the final elder spoke up. His voice held a chilling weight that momentarily froze the room. "Don't forget, Gojo, Izuku Yagi's secret execution has only been postponed." Those words were like a punch to the gut, stopping Gojo in his tracks. He turned his head slightly, casting a sidelong glance at the elder. Even through his sunglasses, the warning was palpable, simmering just beneath the surface. "And don't you forget," Gojo replied, his voice low and filled with quiet intensity, "if it comes to that, I'm on Izuku's side." "You would defy us?" the elder asked, his voice a mix of disbelief and fury, eyes flashing with anger. In a heartbeat, Gojo replied without a moment's hesitation, "That kid's got potential you can't even imagine. And I'm not about to let you snuff it out just because you're scared of what you don't understand." With those parting words echoing in the air, Gojo strode out of the room, leaving a trail of tension and unspoken threats. As the door clicked shut behind him, the elders exchanged uneasy glances, each grappling with the weight of their precarious situation. "What do we do now?" one of the elders finally asked, breaking the silence that had enveloped them. "We wait," the final elder replied, his gaze settling on the door through which Gojo had just exited. "And we watch. Gojo may be powerful, but even he can't protect the boy forever." With Gojo. As Gojo stepped out of the meeting with the school directors, he exhaled deeply, a heavy sigh escaping his lips. The crisp morning air filled his lungs, a refreshing contrast to the suffocating atmosphere he had just left behind. "Sheesh. Those old geezers are incredibly rude," Gojo grumbled under his breath, shaking his head in frustration. He reached up, swiftly removing his signature sunglasses, revealing his striking blue eyes that sparkled like the sky above. With effortless grace, he slicked back his unruly white hair and began to wrap the familiar white bandages around his eyes, a ritual that shielded him while also marking the unwavering resolve he carried. As he worked through the motions, his mind drifted. "I have to be vigilant. I never want to end up like them." His voice, though soft, held a fierce determination. "Don't they understand? No one should rob youth from the young." Gojo's feet carried him down the concrete staircase, each step echoing in the tranquil morning air. Halfway down, he paused, captivated by the scene unfolding before him. The school's track field stretched out like a canvas below, bathed in the warm, golden light of the rising sun. Four figures were out on the track, their breaths visible in the cool morning breeze. Panda lounged on the grass, while Maki, Toge, and Izuku sprinted around the track. Maki and Toge led the pack, their long strides full of confidence as they began their third lap, muscles coiling tightly with each powerful step. Meanwhile, Izuku trailed behind, giving it his all. Sweat plastered his black hair to his forehead, and his chest heaved with effort, a testament to both fatigue and tenacity. Despite the obvious struggle, determination blazed in his emerald eyes as he pushed himself relentlessly to catch up to his classmates. A small, genuine smile crept onto Gojo's lips as he witnessed the youthful energy of their endeavor. "No one should take their youth away," he murmured, almost as if reaffirming a promise to himself. "I'll make sure of that." With a renewed sense of purpose, he descended the stairs, ready to embrace the vibrant life he aimed to protect. Time skip. Gojo led Izuku to a small shed tucked away in a quiet corner of the school grounds. The wooden structure stood unassuming, its weathered exterior belying the treasures within. With a mischievous glint in his eye, Gojo produced a key from his pocket and unlocked the door, sliding it open with a dramatic flourish. "After you, kiddo," he said, gesturing with a sweeping bow. Izuku stepped inside, his eyes widening as he took in the sight before him. "Whoa," he breathed, his voice barely above a whisper. The room was a veritable treasure trove of mystical artifacts. Swords of various styles and sizes lined the walls, their blades gleaming in the dim light. Staff of different woods and lengths stood in neat rows, their surfaces etched with intricate symbols that seemed to whisper ancient secrets. Scrolls, some yellowed with age and others pristine and new, were stacked on shelves that reached the ceiling, hinting at countless stories waiting to be uncovered. Gojo sauntered in after him, hands casually tucked in his pockets. "So, here's the deal," he said, his tone light, but carrying an undercurrent of seriousness. "Exorcising Rika? Not gonna happen. She's too strong, too deeply intertwined with you. But unraveling the curse? That's our ticket out of this mess." Izuku tilted his head, confusion knitting his brow. "Unraveling?" he asked, the term rolling off his tongue like a foreign language. "Yep," Gojo nodded, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "Think of it like untying a bunch of knots of cursed energy. Thousands of them, all tangled up. We're gonna undo them one by one." As he spoke, Gojo meandered over to a wall lined with katanas. He hummed thoughtfully, his fingers dancing along the hilts, testing their weight and balance with a practiced ease. "It's a special trick for cursed humans like you," he explained, his voice taking on a more instructive tone. Without warning, he plucked a katana from the wall and tossed it to Izuku. "Heads up!" Izuku yelped, his hands fumbling as he tried to catch the weapon. He managed to grasp it, but not before nearly dropping it twice. "A katana?" he squeaked, staring at the blade in his hands. It was a beautiful weapon, with a red-wrapped handle and a golden guard that caught the light, shimmering like a beacon of hope amidst the shadows. Gojo leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. "So, curses like things, objects, you know?" he began, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "Your connection to Rika? It's through that ring you wear. Think of it like a pipe that's already there, connecting you two." Izuku nodded slowly, his teal eyes fixed on Gojo as he tried to absorb the explanation. "What you gotta do," Gojo continued, pushing off the wall and pacing the room, "is channel Rika's curse into the katana. Learn to control it, to direct it, then do it again and again with different objects. Eventually, you'll have the whole curse under your thumb. Then boom, you're both free." He stopped his pacing and leaned in closer to Izuku, poking him in the chest with a long finger. "But first," he said, his voice dropping to a dramatic whisper, "you gotta learn how to use that thing. Because right now, you're so weak it's laughable." Izuku's eye twitched, a mix of annoyance and determination flashing across his face. "This idiot," he thought, tightening his grip on the katana. Gojo stepped back, flashing a cheesy grin and giving a thumbs up. "So, it's time to start training," he announced, his enthusiasm almost palpable. Izuku's face fell as realization dawned on him. "Wait," he said slowly, a note of panic creeping into his voice. "When you say training, you don't mean with her, right?" "Right." Gojo's grin only widened, a mischievous glint dancing in his eyes. Scene change. Track field. The afternoon sun hung low in the sky, casting long, dramatic shadows across the track field. Its warm rays mingled with a palpable tension that seemed to electrify the air. Izuku stood resolutely, his heart pounding in his chest as he faced Maki, who exuded a calm confidence. Frustration bubbled within him, prompting a silent curse directed at Gojo-sensei. "Curse you, Gojo-sensei," he thought, irritation simmering just beneath the surface. The wooden practice katana felt reassuringly solid in his grip, its weight a familiar comfort amidst the turmoil of his nerves. Across from him, Maki stood firmly, gripping her wooden staff with a confident resolve. Her intense eyes shone with determination, every bit of her posture radiating strength. The sunlight danced off the polished surface of her staff, lending an almost ethereal quality to her fierce presence. Both fighters regarded each other, muscles coiled like springs, acutely aware that this contest would be more than a mere test of skill. It would also challenge their wits and instincts. Izuku took a steadying breath, grounding himself before launching forward. His feet kicked up small clouds of dust from the track as he charged ahead, katana in hand. He unleashed a flurry of quick slashes, each aimed with precision and intent. But Maki, sharp and agile, proved to be a step ahead. She expertly blocked each strike, the rhythmic clack of wood meeting metal resonating through the air. Frustration simmered within Izuku as none of his blows found their mark. He gritted his teeth, pushing himself to his limits, each movement growing more frantic in its intensity. Maki, in stark contrast, remained calm and calculated, her gaze constantly scanning for an opening in his defense. Then it happened. Maki spotted her opportunity as Izuku overextended during a particularly aggressive swing. Sensing the weakness in his stance, she deftly stepped forward, jabbing her staff toward his exposed shoulder with a fierce determination. Izuku's eyes widened in surprise at the last possible blow, but the impact reverberated through his arm, forcing him to stumble back a step. As the sparring continued, a flicker of movement at the edge of the field caught Izuku's attention. He glanced over to see Gojo ambling toward them, hands casually tucked into his pockets and a lazy grin plastered across his face. "Hey, everyone, how's it going?" he called out, waving nonchalantly, his carefree demeanor starkly contrasting the intensity of the duel. "Oh, Izuku started to respond, his concentration momentarily broken, a mix of surprise and irritation flashing across his face. That fleeting moment of distraction was all Maki needed. With lightning precision, she swung her staff, landing a crisp thwack across Izuku's cheek. The sting of the impact jolted him back to the present, reminding him of the stakes in this battle of skill and strategy. Izuku yelped in pain, stumbling backward as he instinctively raised a hand to his stinging face. Maki lowered her staff. Her expression was stern yet not unkind. "Don't get distracted, newbie," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the air like a whip. Izuku winced, rubbing his cheek where Maki's staff had struck him. The sharp sting served as a harsh reminder of his inexperience. He took a deep breath, struggling to calm his racing heart and regain his focus. "Yeah, right," he muttered under his breath, more to himself than to Maki, feeling a mix of embarrassment and determination. Maki's voice sliced through his thoughts again, firm but not unkind. "Don't just stand there. Get back in your stance." Nodding quickly, Izuku dropped into a fighting position, his muscles tensing with anticipation. "Right, sorry," he replied, tightening his grip on the wooden katana. A sweat drop formed on his brow as he thought. Sometimes I wonder if she and Aizawa-sensei are related because of how strict they both are. Maki raised an eyebrow, a hint of challenge glimmering in her eyes. "Are you going to land a blow on me sometime today?" she asked, settling back in her stance, staff held at the ready like a coiled spring. Determination ignited in Izuku's teal eyes. He felt a surge of energy, a potent mix of frustration and resolve. "Yeah, right now," he declared, his voice ringing with newfound strength. They resumed their sparring, but this time, Maki took the offensive. She launched a flurry of strikes with her staff, each one a blur that tested Izuku's defenses. Now more focused, he began to block her attacks with increasing confidence, his movements becoming smoother and his reactions sharper. Spotting an opening, Izuku feinted to the left, then quickly changed direction, aiming a horizontal slash at Maki's right side. But Maki, ever agile, saw through his deception. With graceful precision, she executed a side flip over Izuku's blade, the wooden katana whistling harmlessly beneath her as she soared above. Izuku's eyes widened in surprise. She dodged that, he thought, his mind racing, but she's off balance. I can catch her before she lands. As Maki descended, Izuku swung his katana upward, hoping to catch her mid-air. But she was one step ahead. The moment her feet touched the ground, she dropped into a perfect split, his upward slash passing harmlessly over her head. Before Izuku could recover from his missed attack, Maki sprang into action. She hooked her leg around one of Izuku's, simultaneously grabbing the shoulder of his shirt with her free hand. In one fluid motion, she executed a skillful takedown, pulling Izuku off balance and sending him crashing to the ground. As Izuku fell, Maki brought the end of her wooden staff down, stopping just short of striking his forehead. The move was so quick, so precise, that Izuku barely had time to blink. The world around him spun as he lay there, a mix of awe and frustration coursing through him. He knew he had much to learn, but he also felt a flicker of excitement at the challenge ahead. Second out, Maki declared with a calm exterior, though satisfaction laced her voice. She got off Izuku, her small triumphant smile illuminated by the afternoon sun. At this moment, she reveled in her victory once more, remaining undefeated. Izuku lay on the ground for a moment longer, his face flushed and his forehead throbbing where Maki's staff had nearly struck him. "Did you have to do that?" he grumbled, wincing and rubbing the sore spot. The adrenaline of the practice fight began to ebb, leaving behind the ache in his muscles, a reminder of just how close he'd come to defeat. Maki regarded him, her expression stern yet softening with a flicker of understanding in her eyes. "Don't get complacent," she said, her tone firm but not devoid of compassion. "Treat this like a real fight. We improve more quickly when there are real consequences." She turned to walk away, but Izuku's voice caught her attention, halting her steps. "Maki, wait!" he called out as he scrambled to his feet, his muscles protesting with each movement. Determination blazed in his green eyes, banishing the fatigue. "One more round." Maki hesitated, her gaze drifting back to Izuku. She saw the resolve etched into his features, the way his brow furrowed and his jaw clenched, driven by an unyielding spirit. After a moment's contemplation, she nodded, a smile teasing the corners of her lips. "All right, one more. Show me what you've got." As she spoke, her heart raced with the thrill of their challenge, ready to push the boundaries of their skills once more. As they squared off once more, taking their fighting stances, a playful voice drifted over from the sidelines. Panda observed the scene with thoughtful eyes, breaking the tension. "It's been 3 months since Izuku joined us," he remarked, a hint of pride in his tone. "Salmon," Inumaki added cryptically, his cursed speech as enigmatic as ever. Panda nodded appreciatively, as if Inumaki's words made perfect sense in this context. "He's moving a lot better," he noted, keenly watching as Izuku and Maki began to circle each other, their muscles coiling with anticipation. Gojo, usually the center of attention with his charismatic presence, spoke up unexpectedly. "He's more positive too," he noted, a flicker of pride lighting his eyes as he observed Izuku's growth. Inumaki chimed in again, saying simply, "Salted fish roe." "Maki seems somewhat happier these days," Panda mused, his gaze fixated on the sparring match. There used to be no other weapon user around. Suddenly, inspiration struck him, and his panda face transformed into an expression of mischief. "Eureka!" he exclaimed, eyes gleaming with excitement. "Izuku, get over here!" Panda shouted, waving his fluffy arms wildly, causing a few onlookers to turn their heads in surprise. Startled by the sudden call, Izuku jogged over, still catching his breath from the intense training session. "Yeah, Panda?" he asked, wiping the sweat off his brow, his heart still racing. Panda leaned in close, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that instantly piqued Izuku's interest. "Listen up. It's something super important. Do you like big ones or smaller ones?" Izuku's face turned beet red as shock washed over him. "Why now?" he screamed inwardly, glancing around frantically to see if anyone heard the brazen question. "I don't really have a preference, but—" he stammered, his embarrassment palpable. At that moment, a whimsical pink background seemed to materialize behind them, complete with the kanji for adult talk floating comically in the air. Panda, unfazed by Izuku's blushing cheeks, slung an arm around his shoulders, pulling him closer to the ridiculousness of the situation. The tension of the sparring session melted away, replaced by an unexpected camaraderie that had blossomed amidst training and challenges. Panda nodded sagely, somehow managing to blush despite being, well, a panda. His playful demeanor was infectious, and it added a lightheartedness to the training session. Izuku clutched his wooden katana closer to his face, using it as a makeshift shield, as if trying to hide behind it. Medium-sized, maybe? He mumbled, his voice barely above a whisper, the words tumbling out in a nervous rush. Good cha, Panda replied with a wink, his enthusiasm unwavering. Without missing a beat, he called out, Maki. From a distance, Maki raised an eyebrow, her expression a mixture of curiosity and caution. Yeah, she responded, her tone wary as she approached. Panda twirled dramatically, striking a pose that would make any runway model proud. Those things are looking good, he declared, gesturing vaguely in Maki's direction with an exaggerated flourish. A visible tick mark appeared on Maki's forehead, her patience wearing thin. What are you going on about? She exclaimed, her grip tightening on her staff as she braced herself for Panda's antics. Undeterred by her growing ire, Panda pressed on, come on, don't be stuck up. Besides, you really needs to get laid. That was the final straw. Maki's face contorted with rage, her eyes blazing like wildfire. In an instant, she summoned her Naginata, the deadly weapon materializing in her hands with a menacing whoosh. You're dead meat, she roared, charging toward Panda with unrestrained fury. PETA is not going to save you from me. As Maki began her assault, slashing at Panda with comical ferocity, Izuku and Inumaki stood off to the side, watching the chaos unfold. Izuku let out a deep sigh, running a hand through his unruly black hair, which was damp with sweat from the intense training session. His green eyes widened in a mix of concern and amusement as he observed the bizarre scene. I guess training's over for today, he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. He glanced at Inumaki, who stood beside him, calmly munching on a rice ball as if this were an everyday occurrence. Izuku hesitated, then asked, should we do something? As he spoke, Maki's Naginata whistled through the air, narrowly missing Panda's head by mere inches. Izuku winced, imagining the catastrophic damage that weapon could inflict if it connected. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, torn between the instinct to intervene and the desire to let the situation play out. The air was filled with the sounds of Maki's furious shouts and Panda's panicked yelps, creating a bizarre symphony that drowned out the usual tranquility of their training ground. Izuku marveled at how quickly things had escalated, all because of Panda's ill-timed comments. He turned to Inumaki again, hoping for some guidance or at least a reaction, but his classmate remained stoic, offering only a cryptic kelp in response. Izuku nodded, pretending to understand, and turned his attention back to the unfolding scene, wondering how long it would take for things to calm down. I still can't get a read on Inumaki, Izuku thought, shaking his head slightly, both amused and perplexed by the whirlwind of chaos that had erupted around them. As Maki continued her playful chase of Panda around the training ground, the air was filled with laughter and shouts. Suddenly, Gojo's voice sliced through the commotion with a light-hearted command. All right, gather up everyone, he called, amusement lacing his tone. Let those two continue their training. Izuku and Inumaki exchanged glances before making their way over to Gojo, leaving Maki and Panda to their antics. Gojo's eyes, concealed behind his signature white bandages, sparkled with mischief as he turned his attention to them. Toge, Gojo began, directing his gaze at Inumaki. A curse has been specifically assigned to you. It's something you're particularly suited for, so I need you to take care of it. Inumaki nodded, finishing the last bite of his rice ball. Salmon, he replied, his usual cryptic response that held a deeper meaning for those who understood. Gojo then shifted his focus to Izuku, his grin widening. Izuku, I want you to accompany Toge. Your job is to support him. Izuku's brow furrowed in confusion. Support? He echoed, uncertainty creeping into his voice as he tried to grasp Gojo's intentions. Gojo's smile softened, taking on a more instructive tone. Watch and learn, Izuku, he explained. Every sorcerer is unique, and there are just as many different exorcist techniques out there. Toge's curse speech is a prime example of this. I want you to observe him in action and learn what you can. Izuku's eyes brightened with understanding and excitement. He nodded eagerly, thrilled at the chance to delve deeper into his classmates' abilities and expand his own understanding of jujitsu sorcery. Got it, Izuku said, determination radiating from him. He turned to Inumaki, offering a small but encouraging smile. "I'll do my best to support you, Inumaki-kun." Inumaki responded with a slight nod, his expression as inscrutable as ever. "Bonito flakes," he murmured, a phrase that Izuku interpreted as acceptance of their partnership. As they prepared to embark on their mission, the sounds of Maki's relentless pursuit of Panda faded into the background. Izuku felt a whirlwind of emotions, nervousness mixed with anticipation, building in his chest. This would be his first time working closely with Inumaki, and he was eager to witness the power of cursed speech firsthand. "We should get going," Gojo said, clapping his hands together to draw attention. "The curse won't exorcise itself, after all." With a final nod from both Izuku and Inumaki, they set off, leaving the lively training grounds behind and stepping into the unknown, ready to face the challenge ahead. Time skip. Hapaina Shopping Center. The entrance of the shopping center loomed ominously before them, draped in shadows that danced and shifted in the subdued light. Weeds, nature's relentless reclaimers, had begun their slow but determined conquest, pushing through cracks in the pavement and crawling up the time-worn walls. Shards of glass, remnants from windows long shattered, caught the sparse sunlight that dared to infiltrate the gloom, glinting like muted jewels against the drab backdrop. Inumaki's tousled hair rustled softly in the faint breeze as he surveyed their surroundings with a watchful gaze. His typical stoic expression was tinged with a hint of concern as he absorbed the dilapidated scene unfolding before him. Beside him, Izuku stood tall, his vibrant green hair creating a striking contrast against the gray and brown tones that enveloped their environment. His emerald eyes flitted anxiously from one shadowy corner to another, alert and primed for any sign of lurking danger. The air hung heavy around them, thick with the dust and unsettling silence that pressed down upon them like an invisible weight. The occasional rustle of wind-blown debris punctuated the stillness, accompanied by the crunch of shattered tiles beneath their feet. It felt as though the very atmosphere was holding its breath, suspended in time, waiting for something to shatter the spell of abandonment that had wrought this once bustling shopping hub. As they approached the entrance to Hapaina Shopping Center, a tall, slender figure emerged from the shadows. The man bore mid-length black hair and wore rectangular glasses that framed his small, dark eyes, giving him an air of deliberate detachment. Sunken cheeks lent him a perpetually bored expression that felt entirely at odds with the eerie surroundings. Kiyotaka Ijichi, the assistant manager from Jujutsu High, cleared his throat and tapped on his tablet, the blue light casting a cold glow across his face in the dim ambience. Hapaina Shopping Center, he stated, his voice flat and matter-of-fact, is now essentially abandoned. There are plans to demolish the entire area to make way for a new, large shopping mall. He swiped across the tablet screen, revealing additional information. An inspection has unearthed a group of low-level curses. Grade 2 Sorcerer Inumaki. Your task is to exorcise those curses. Ijichi glanced up from his tablet, anticipating to see Inumaki standing at attention, but was struck by the jarring reality of space where the cursed speech user should have been. "What?" Ijichi exclaimed, his usually composed demeanor fracturing momentarily. "Where's Sorcerer Inumaki?" Startled by Ijichi's sudden outburst, Izuku quickly scanned their surroundings. His eyes widened in shock as they landed on a familiar figure a short distance away, where Inumaki was unexpectedly fixated on something that caught his interest. "Is he shopping?" Izuku's mind raced, disbelief coloring his inner thoughts as he struggled to comprehend the bizarre situation unfolding before him. Sure enough, Inumaki was standing at a small kiosk that somehow managed to remain operational despite the mall's desolate state. The friendly cashier greeted him with a warm smile, saying, "Thanks for coming." Izuku couldn't help but marvel at Inumaki's knack for finding food even in the most unlikely places. He observed his classmate as he carefully browsed through the offerings at the kiosk, selecting an assortment of snacks, most of which appeared to be seafood-based. The sight was strangely comforting, a pocket of normalcy amid the eerie ambience of the abandoned shopping center. Ijichi-san, Izuku said hesitantly, pointing towards the kiosk. I think I found him. Ijichi followed the direction of Izuku's gesture, his eyebrows rising in surprise as he took in the scene. He let out a long, suffering sigh, pinching the bridge of his nose in exasperation. Of course, he muttered, shaking his head. We're here to exorcise curses, and he's busy buying snacks. As they observed, Inumaki concluded his transaction and returned to the group, a small paper bag carefully cradled in his hands. His expression remained as impassive as ever, as if impromptu food runs during missions were completely routine. Kelp, Inumaki said, lifting the bag in explanation, his voice crisp yet calm. What did you buy? Izuku inquired, curiosity bubbling within him as he leaned closer to glimpse the contents of Inumaki's bag. Inumaki, his face a picture of neutrality, reached into the bag and retrieved a small cylindrical container. He held it up for Izuku to inspect. The label was visible in the dim light surrounding them. Throat medicine? Izuku read aloud, furrowing his brow in confusion. He glanced from the medicine back to Inumaki, struggling to connect the dots. Why would he need throat medicine in the middle of a mission? Ijichi, having watched the exchange with a blend of exasperation and amusement, couldn't resist stepping in to provide clarity. He adjusted his glasses, pushing them up the bridge of his nose with an air of reluctant authority. In short, he began, his tone tinged with mild fatigue. They want to exorcise the curses now before this building develops a reputation for curse energy. He paused for a moment, letting his words resonate. A place like this, abandoned and on the brink of demolition, can quickly become a hotspot for curses if left unchecked. Understanding dawned on Izuku's face as he absorbed Ijichi's explanation. He looked at Inumaki with newfound respect, recognizing that his classmate had been thinking ahead, preparing himself for the strain that utilizing his cursed speech might impose on his throat. Ijichi cleared his throat again, drawing their attention back to him. I'll put up a veil now, he said, his hands already moving through the familiar motions of the technique. As he chanted incantations under his breath, a shimmering barrier began to materialize around the perimeter of the shopping center. Turning back to Izuku and Inumaki, Ijichi's expression softened slightly, a glimmer of encouragement lighting up his eyes. Good luck, gentlemen, he offered, nodding at each of them in turn. The atmosphere felt charged with a mix of determination and camaraderie as they prepared to face the challenges ahead. As Izuku and Inumaki walked through the abandoned shopping center, their footsteps echoing in the eerie silence, back to Gojo's words. The dim light filtering through broken windows cast long shadows, adding to the unsettling atmosphere. Flashback to their arrival at Happina Shopping Center. Izuku stood at the entrance, his fingers tightly gripping the hilt of his katana. A sheen of sweat coated his palms, and his heart raced in his chest, pounding like a drum. My first field work. Wait, no, my second? He thought, desperately trying to calm his nerves. The reality of the moment settled in, and he couldn't shake the feeling of anxiety creeping up on him. Either way, I'm so nervous. Just then, a hand tapped his shoulder, causing Izuku to jump in surprise. He spun around to find Inumaki standing there, his expression as stoic as ever, but something about the shadowy light cast an ominous air around him. Salmon, Inumaki said, his wide, pupil-less eyes locking onto Izuku's with an intensity that sent shivers down his spine. The fog swirling around them only heightened the tension, wrapping the scene in an eerie atmosphere. Izuku let out a startled yelp, stumbling backward as he tried to regain his composure. Oh, sorry, he blurted, catching his breath. You startled me. Before Inumaki could respond, a familiar voice cut through the thick tension like a knife. Hey, Izuku. Turning to face his teacher, Izuku found Gojo standing there, his usual carefree demeanor replaced by a serious expression that sent a chill through the air. Sorry, I can't go with you guys, Gojo said, his tone more grave than usual. It's a mission that's easy enough for Toge to handle alone, so try to relax. He paused, his eyes narrowing as he leaned closer. But there's one thing you should be concerned about. Don't let Rika out. There's no guarantee she'll calm down like last time. Only use as much of Rika's power as you can through the sword. Izuku nodded, the weight of responsibility settling heavily on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. He felt the gravity of the situation sink in, but Gojo wasn't finished. Suddenly, his serious expression morphed into an embarrassed blush, and he added, "If she manifests again, and I will be disposed of." Izuku's face fell into a deadpan expression, his mind racing. "Wah!" he exclaimed, unable to contain his shock. Internally, he shouted, "Why put all this pressure on me now?" The stakes had never felt higher, and as he stood there, the fog swirling around him, he realized he was about to step into a world of uncertainty and danger. Flashback ends. As the memory faded like the last flicker of light at dusk, Izuku found himself back in the present, navigating the shadowy corridors of an abandoned mall alongside Inumaki. He inhaled deeply, trying to center himself on the mission rather than the anxiety-laden warning from Gojo that echoed ominously in his mind. "Curses," he said, "a group of low-level ones, right?" Izuku inquired, his voice trembling slightly as a bead of sweat trickled down his temple, a testament to the rising tension. Inumaki nodded, his expression as stoic as ever. "Spice Cod Row," he replied cryptically, his voice devoid of any tremor. Suddenly, an eerie, distorted voice reverberated through the hollow chambers of the mall, sending an involuntary shiver cascading down Izuku's spine. "Mutter, mutter." It resonated like a dark echo, wrapping around him with a chill. Izuku's eyes widened in alarm. He scanned their surroundings, his heart thundering in his chest. Then he saw it, a grotesquely oversized sardine-like curse materializing from the shadows, its bulging eyes grotesquely popping from its head in a disconcerting manner that twisted his stomach into knots. Is that what we're dealing with?" Izuku whispered, his hand tightening instinctively around the hilt of his sword, as if it could somehow shield him from the surreal horror before them. The cursed entity was adorned with slimy, iridescent scales that shimmered with an unnatural gleam in the dim light of the abandoned space. Its mouth gaped wide, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth, each one a testament to the creature's predatory nature. The sight was an absurd yet terrifying parody of the fish Izuku was familiar with from bustling markets and vibrant aquariums. As more sardine-like curses began to materialize, their distorted voices filled the air, blending into a disquieting chorus that echoed around them. "No fair, Mom. Why does he get more?" whined one curse, its bulging eyes darting between its companions as if envious. "Let's trade that for a new one," suggested another, its scales glistening slickly as it floated through the air, twisting with each word. "Smells of fragrant olive," muttered a third, its gaping mouth revealing yet another row of those menacing teeth. The curses began to swirl together, intermingling in a sinuous mass of writhing, fish-like bodies. Their voices merged, creating an unsettling chant that seemed to resonate deep within Izuku. "If we all go together, there's nothing to fear." A chill ran through him, reminiscent of Maki's stern words echoing in his mind. "The weak ones always come in swarms." As the memory ebbed away, Izuku turned his focus back to the unfolding horror before him. His breath caught as he watched Inumaki stride confidently toward the swirling mass of curses, a striking display of resolve amid the chaotic scene. The air thickened with tension, and Izuku held his breath, unsure of what to expect next. Inumaki halted a few feet away from the spiraling amalgamation of fish-like creatures, calm and deliberate. He pulled down the collar that usually concealed the lower half of his face, revealing a fierce determination burning in his eyes, a stark contrast to his typical neutral demeanor. For a heartbeat, time seemed to freeze. The curses chanting faltered, their bulging eyes locking onto Inumaki with rapt attention. Even the dust motes hanging in the air seemed to halt, suspended in a moment of suspense. Then, with unwavering clarity, Inumaki spoke a single word, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Explode." The effect was immediate and spectacular. The cluster of curses began to shake violently, as if each creature within was battling against an invisible force. Bright flashes of light erupted from the mass, accompanied by a series of sharp, popping sounds that pierced the eerie atmosphere. Instinctively, Izuku raised an arm to shield his eyes from the sudden bursts. Through squinted lashes, he observed in awe as the curses started to disintegrate, their twisted forms shattering into smaller and smaller pieces until they vanished entirely. With each flicker of light, it felt as though a great weight was being lifted from the air. Within seconds, the space around them transformed. A fine, shimmering mist filled the air, the remnants of the once threatening curses now suspended like ethereal particles dancing on an unseen breeze. The mist lingered for a moment before dissolving into nothingness, leaving behind an almost palpable silence that seemed to envelop everything. Izuku lowered his arm, his eyes wide with wonder. The scene that had just unfolded before him left him at a loss for words. Thoughts raced through his mind, each one more exhilarating than the last. Was this truly the full power of cursed speech? A memory flashed across his thoughts, echoing Gojo's words with clarity. It's just like it says, words imbued with cursed energy. Well, it's easier if you see it. True to Gojo's insight, Izuku felt a wave of understanding wash over him. He turned to Inumaki, a grin breaking out across his face as his excitement bubbled within him. "All right, we're done, aren't we?" Inumaki, ever composed, calmly adjusted his collar back up, his expression remaining neutral, almost serene. "Tuna Mayo," he croaked, his voice noticeably hoarse, as if uttering those words took a considerable toll on his throat. Izuku winced slightly at the sound. His concern began to bloom. His voice sounds so raspy, he thought, his mind quickly connecting the dots. Oh, so that's what the throat medicine is for. It must strain his vocal cords to use that technique. Hidden within the shadows of the abandoned mall, a figure observed Izuku and Inumaki with keen interest. A sly grin unfurled across their lips as they took in the young sorcerer's impressive feat. As they stood there, catching their breath, a nagging feeling tugged at Izuku's instincts. He swept his gaze around, brow furrowing in confusion. "That's odd," he murmured, more to himself than to Inumaki. "The veil still hasn't come down. Shouldn't Ajichi-sen have lowered it by now?" A sense of unease began to creep into his thoughts. What could be causing this delay? The air around them buzzed with unspent tension, and Izuku felt the thrill of uncertainty wash over him, urging him to stay alert for whatever might come next. Inumaki responded with fish flakes, his voice laced with an undertone of apprehension that Izuku had not perceived previously. All at once, the atmosphere around them grew dense. A burdensome presence filled the deserted shopping center's clearing, triggering a prickling sensation on the nape of Izuku's neck. He experienced a shiver darting down his spine, his instincts sending loud warnings of imminent danger. Unexpectedly, a curse materialized behind them. Izuku and Inumaki whirled around, their bodies stiffening in preparation for a confrontation. The sight that met their eyes caused Izuku's breath to hitch in his throat. The curse that loomed over them was a sight beyond anything Izuku could have ever conceived. Its gargantuan head was characterized by a lengthy, elephantine trunk that oscillated menacingly. However, it was the creature's eyes that truly unsettled him, protruding in spiral. They appeared to rotate with frenzied energy, evoking a sense of madness and insatiable hunger. The entity presented itself as a terrifying amalgamation of textures. A dense, tangled layer of fur blanketed its form, intermittently disrupted by sections of gelatinous, throbbing tissue. Its configuration was elusive, continually morphing like an animated silhouette, a living nightmare. Short appendages sprouted from its nebulous figure, culminating in dangerously pointed talons that appeared capable of shredding metal. Most disturbing was the profound, shadowy abyss that gaped beneath the aberration. It hovered above this chasm, seemingly suspended within the liminal space between our reality and an infinitely more horrifying realm. The perimeter of the abyss writhed and stretched as if it yearned to consume everything around it. Izuku's heart hammered an urgent rhythm against his ribcage, his grip tightening around his sword's handle as perspiration began to bead. His gaze met with Inumaki's, a mirror reflecting a mutual dread. They were not confronting a minor menace. This creature was far more formidable than anything they had anticipated. The atmosphere was electrified as a blinding column of concentrated light plummeted down, cleaving the space between Izuku and Inumaki. The ground beneath them fractured and fissured, the resonating sound reverberating throughout the desolate shopping complex. Inumaki, without a moment's hesitation, pushed Izuku to safety, his swift response shielding them from immediate danger. The light beam amplified its energy, gouging a gaping chasm in the floor between them. Rubble descended in a shower, and a cloud of dust erupted, momentarily clouding their vision. Inumaki! Izuku's voice echoed, fraught with anxiety and trepidation. He struggled to discern his companion's form within the dispersing dust. Inumaki's eyes, usually calm, now gleamed with resolve as he lowered his collar. His voice, typically serene, resonated with an authoritative clarity that pierced the turmoil. Get twisted! The curse's massive form shuddered at Inumaki's command, its body rippling like a disturbed pond. The air crackled with tension as the students watched, hope flickering in their eyes. But their elation quickly turned to horror as only two of the curse's fingers twisted grotesquely. Inumaki's eyes widened in shock, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. His cursed speech, usually so potent, had barely scratched the surface of this formidable entity. The strain of using his technique against such a powerful opponent took its toll immediately. Inumaki doubled over, his body racked with violent coughs that echoed through the abandoned mall. Crimson droplets splattered on the ground, a stark contrast to the dull gray of the debris-strewn floor. Each ragged gasp was a painful reminder of the curse's overwhelming strength and the dire situation they found themselves in. Izuku watched in terror as another beam of light, bright and menacing, shot toward his incapacitated friend. Time seemed to slow, the world narrowing to a pinpoint as adrenaline surged through his veins. Without conscious thought, Izuku's body moved on its own. He sprang into action, his feet skidding across the debris-littered floor. His heart pounded in his ears, drowning out everything but the urgent need to save his friend. "Hang on, Inumaki!" Izuku's voice rang out, raw with desperation. He reached out, his fingers grasping Inumaki's arm with surprising strength. With a Herculean effort born of pure survival. Instinct, he pulled his friend out of harm's way. The beam scorched the spot where Inumaki had been standing mere seconds ago, leaving a smoldering crater on the floor. The heat from the near miss singed Izuku's hair, the acrid smell of burnt keratin filling his nostrils a stark reminder of how close they had come to disaster. Panting heavily, sweat beading on his brow, Izuku wrapped one of Inumaki's arms around his shoulders. He could feel his friend's labored breathing, each inhaling a painful wheeze that sent a pang of worry through Izuku's heart. "We need to get out of here," Izuku muttered, his green eyes darting around frantically for an escape route. The oppressive presence of the curse seemed to close in around them, making the air thick and heavy. Through the settling dust and debris, a glimmer of hope appeared. Izuku spotted a staircase nearby, its metal railing glinting faintly in the dim light. It was their best chance at putting some distance between them and the monstrous entity that pursued them. With renewed determination etched on his face, Izuku half-carried, half-dragged Inumaki towards their potential salvation. The curse remained motionless in the center of the mall, its spiral eyes spinning hypnotically. The air grew heavy with its malevolent presence, an invisible force that seemed to push against them with each step. It was as if they were wading through molasses, every movement requiring immense effort. As they ascended the stairs, the sound of their labored breathing mingled with the ominous creaking of the old building. Each step groaned under their combined weight, the rusty metal threatening to give way at any moment. Izuku's muscles burned with the effort of supporting both his and Inumaki's weight, but he pushed on, driven by the desperate need to get them to safety. With each agonizing step, Izuku's mind raced. He knew they couldn't keep running forever. They needed a plan, a way to turn the tables on this seemingly unstoppable force. As they reached the landing, Izuku's eyes fell on Inumaki's pale face. An idea began to form in his mind, a risky gambit that might just give them a fighting chance. Scene change. After Izuku managed to drag Inumaki up the stairs, they paused to catch their breath. The musty air of the abandoned mall filled their lungs as they leaned against a crumbling wall, the distant echoes of the curse's movements sending shivers down their spines. Inumaki winced, his dislocated fingers jutting out at odd angles. The pain etched deep lines across his usually calm face. Without hesitation, he reached to pop them back into place, his jaw set with grim determination. But Izuku, ever observant and caring, quickly intervened. "Wait!" Izuku exclaimed, his voice laced with concern. His green eyes widened as he gently caught Inumaki's wrist. "Let me help you with that. It'll be easier and less painful if I do it." Inumaki hesitated for a moment, his eyes flickering between Izuku's face and his mangled fingers. After a brief internal struggle, he nodded, allowing Izuku to carefully take his hand. With a series of quick, practiced movements, Izuku set each finger back into its proper position. The snaps and pops of realigning joints echoed in the empty hallway. Inumaki gritted his teeth, his free hand clenching into a fist as he suppressed any sounds of discomfort. Izuku's touch was gentle yet firm, his brow furrowed in concentration as he worked. "Kelp," Inumaki muttered once it was done, flexing his fingers experimentally. The word hung in the air, tinged with gratitude and relief. Izuku nodded, his expression serious as he scanned the area below. The curse's massive form loomed in the shadows, its presence a tangible weight in the air. "I'm going back down there," he said, his voice low but determined. "We need that throat medicine for you to use your cursed speech effectively." Before Inumaki could protest, Izuku was already making his way down the stairs. His footsteps echoed in the eerie silence of the abandoned mall, each creak of the old steps sending his heart racing. As he approached the curse, Izuku felt a familiar presence behind him. A pinkish-black aura shimmered in the air, taking on the vague shape of Rika. "Get it, Izuku?" Rika's voice echoed in his mind, a mix of encouragement and urgency that spurred him on. The curse, the sudden surge of energy, turned its attention fully to Izuku. Its bulging, spiral eyes seemed to spin faster, hypnotic and terrifying. The air crackled with malevolent intent, making Izuku's skin prickle with goosebumps. Izuku gripped his katana tightly, feeling the smooth wrapped handle against his palms. He channeled his curse energy into the blade, watching as the steel began to glow with a faint pink light. It hummed with power, vibrating slightly in his grasp. The curse, sensing the threat, unleashed a barrage of light beams, each one sizzling through the air with deadly precision. With a grace born from countless hours of training, Izuku moved. He twisted his body, narrowly avoiding a beam that singed the edge of his uniform. He leaped over fallen debris, his heart pounding in his ears as another blast cratered the floor where he had just been standing. He rolled, feeling the heat of a near miss warm his back. The floor around him became pockmarked with smoldering holes, the acrid smell of burnt concrete filling the air. Seizing a momentary lapse in the curse's attack, Izuku surged forward. He closed the distance in the blink of an eye, his katana flashing in the dim light. With a powerful vertical slash, Izuku struck at the curse's core, putting all his strength behind the blow. The blade met resistance, and for a split second, Izuku thought he had landed a decisive blow. But the curse was far from defeated. With inhuman speed, it lashed out with an invisible attack. Izuku felt a searing pain across the right side of his head, warm vital fluid trickling down his face and into his eye. Stumbling back, Izuku blinked rapidly, trying to clear his vision. The metallic taste of vital fluid filled his mouth as he panted, reassessing the situation. That's when he spotted it, the throat medicine, lying just a few feet away from the curse's massive form. Time seemed to slow as Izuku formulated a plan, his mind racing through possibilities. Taking a deep breath, Izuku charged forward once more. The curse, anticipating another frontal assault, readied its defenses. But at the last moment, Izuku dropped into a slide, his uniform scraping against the debris-strewn floor. He shot between the curse's legs, his hand outstretched, fingers grasping at the air. His fingers closed around the bottle of throat medicine just as he cleared the curse's massive body. Without missing a beat, Izuku sprang to his feet, spinning to face the stairs. His muscles burned with exertion, but adrenaline kept him moving. "Inumaki!" he shouted, spotting his friend at the top of the staircase. With all his might, Izuku hurled the medicine upwards, watching it arc through the air. Inumaki, having anticipated Izuku's plan, was already in motion. He leaped into the air, his body arcing gracefully as he snatched the bottle mid-flight. In one fluid motion, he uncapped the medicine and downed its contents, his atoms apple bobbing as he swallowed. Landing with cat-like grace, Inumaki turned to face the curse. His eyes blazed with determination as he pulled down his collar, revealing the markings that denoted his cursed speech. The curse, sensing the impending danger, began to gather its energy for one final, devastating attack. The air crackled with power, a low hum building to a deafening pitch. But Inumaki was faster. His voice, clear and powerful, rang out through them all, cutting through the ominous buildup of the curse's attack. "Get crushed!" The effect was instantaneous and overwhelming. Unlike before, when only a small part of the curse had been affected, this time the entire entity shuddered violently. Its massive form began to collapse in on itself, as if being compacted by an invisible force. The air crackled with energy, and the very foundations of the mall seemed to tremble. The curse let out an otherworldly shriek that sent chills down Izuku's spine. Its body twisted and compressed, the sound reverberating through the mall like a demonic echo. Dust and debris rained down from the ceiling, creating a hazy veil in the air. Izuku watched in awe and terror as the once terrifying entity was reduced to a fraction of its former size, its spiral eyes spinning wildly in desperation. With a final, echoing crack that sounded like the snapping of 1,000 bones, the curse imploded. The air rushed to fill the void left behind, creating a gust that whipped Izuku's hair around his face. Where the massive curse had once stood, now only a small, dense sphere of cursed energy remained, pulsing with malevolent power. As the oppressive aura that had filled the mall dissipated, Izuku felt his shoulders sag with relief. The sudden absence of danger left him feeling lightheaded, his heart still pounding in his chest. "Wow!" Izuku breathed, his eyes wide with a mix of awe and disbelief. The adrenaline was still coursing through his veins, making his hands shake slightly. He flexed his fingers, trying to regain control of his trembling limbs. "Leaf mustard," Inumaki called out, his voice filled with concern as he jogged toward Izuku. Despite the cryptic nature of his cursed speech, the worry in his eyes was clear as day. He scanned Izuku from head to toe, checking for any serious injuries. Izuku managed a reassuring smile, even as he felt the warm trickle of vital fluid down the side of his face. The metallic taste of vital fluid touched his lips as he spoke. "Yeah, I'm fine. It's just a graze," he said, wiping at the wound with the back of his hand. The sting made him wince involuntarily, but he tried to hide it for Inumaki's sake. "Nothing to worry about." "Salmon," Inumaki said, his tone lighter now. A grin spread across his face, relief evident in his posture. He held up his hand for a high five, his eyes shining with the thrill of their victory. "Yeah, nice job." Izuku laughed, the sound of genuine joy echoing through the now quiet mall. He slapped his palm against Inumaki's, the sharp sound a stark contrast to the chaos of moments ago. The contact sent a jolt of pain through his injured hand, but Izuku didn't care. They had won, against all odds. As the two boys celebrated their victory, basking in the afterglow of their success, they were unaware of the figure watching them from the shadows. Hidden behind a partially collapsed pillar, a man observed the scene with keen interest, his eyes fixed on Izuku. The man cut an imposing figure, tall and slim with a muscular build that spoke of years of rigorous training. His long black hair was partially tied up in a neat man bun, the rest flowing down his back like a silken curtain. Thin, calculating black eyes peered out from beneath bangs that occasionally covered his left eye, giving him an air of mystery and danger. His attire was as striking as his appearance, a gold-colored kaya garment draped elegantly over black yukata robes, the fabric whispering softly with each subtle movement. His feet were clad in pristine white tabi socks and Zora sandals, a traditional touch that seemed at odds with the modern setting. Large circular earrings dangled from his ears, catching what little light filtered into the mall and reflecting it in mesmerizing patterns. "I was hoping I'd get to see the famous Rika," the man murmured to himself, his voice barely above a whisper, yet filled with intrigue. "A special grade, no less. Can't wait to meet you." His long, nimble fingers toyed with something in his hand, Izuku's student ID, the plastic worn and scratched from the recent battle. A small, enigmatic smile played at the corners of his mouth as he added, "And I suppose I should return this. It might make for an interesting introduction." The scene shifted abruptly, time seeming to pass in the blink of an eye. The abandoned mall, with its debris-strewn floors and battle-scarred walls, faded away like mist in the morning sun. In its place materialized the familiar hallways of Jujutsu High School, a stark contrast to the chaos of the previous setting. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor and illuminating motes of dust that danced in the air. In one of these sunlit corridors, Ijichi stood before Gojo, his head bowed low in a gesture of deep apology. The normally composed assistant looked visibly shaken, his shoulders slumped under the weight of perceived failure. "My deepest apologies," Ijichi said, his voice heavy with regret and tinged with fear. "Someone cast another veil on top of mine, a technique far beyond my capabilities to detect or counter. Additionally, there was an unidentified semi-grade 1 curse present, something that should have been impossible given our initial assessments." He took a shaky breath before continuing, "I take full responsibility for this oversight and any danger it placed our students in." Gojo's usually carefree demeanor was replaced with a serious expression, his hidden eyes seeming to pierce his head, his shock of white hair swaying with emotion like a snow-capped mountain in the wind. "No, Ijichi," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "The enemy we're dealing with is far too strong, far beyond what we initially anticipated. This isn't your fault." He paused, his concealed gaze seeming to look through Ijichi and into some distant, troubling future. "But do you have any idea who might be behind this? Any suspicions at all?" Ijichi's face paled slightly, the color draining from his cheeks, as if the very name he was about to utter carried a curse of its own. He answered, his voice barely above a whisper, as if afraid that speaking too loudly might summon the very person they feared. "Suguru Geto." The name hung in the air like a dark cloud, heavy with the promise of storms to come. Ijichi continued, each word seeming to pain him. "Of the 4 special grades, he's considered the worst of all curse users. He was expelled from Jujutsu High for reasons I don't fully understand, and since then," Ijichi swallowed hard, forcing himself to finish, "and since then, he's killed over 100 civilians. His power and cruelty know no bounds." So, this was the end of part 2 of this series. Stay tuned for next part of this series, and if you like this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Until next time,